Thank you. So hello and welcome to the Nutrient Management Board on the 27th of September 2021. I'm Councillor Elizabeth Swinglehurst and I'm the board. This is going to be a long meeting. There are no breaks intended. If you need to go off, then if you just turn your camera off, that will be fine. The meeting is not being live streamed, not having the capacity to do that today, but it is going to be recorded and it will be uploaded onto the YouTube channel. I've decided to leave the chat function open to all attendees, members and board members, because I feel that it has a useful role to play in terms of picking up questions and providing answers as the meeting progresses. But I would be really grateful if it's not used as a running commentary, because actually that's not helpful. It distracts from the questions that are embedded in there and that you could be getting answers to. And if it could be respectful, I'd be very grateful. Thank you. When board members come to speak, if they could introduce themselves so everyone knows who you are, that would be helpful. And just to let everyone know that this meeting is not being supported by government services. The officers are doing the best that they can to take over roles that they're not familiar with. So if we could all be a little bit patient, if there are kind of technical glitches here and there, I'd be grateful. As with the previous meeting, voting will be by assumed assent, which means that and if you have an issue with a decision, please to speak up, pipe up. Dissent will be recorded, and if it is in the majority view, then obviously that is what the decision will reflect. And so if you remain silent, it will be assumed that you are in agreement with whatever the proposal is. So right, having said all that, does anyone got any apologies to record? No, I think there was one or two which I think we'll add in as and when. The minutes of the last meeting were circulated, I believe, and has anyone got any points that they wish to raise about the minutes of the last meeting in terms of accuracy? I'll take that as a no. In terms of matters arising, I've got one or two things that I just want to pick up on. There was a note for the very interesting talk that was given Cottington for the slides to be shared, and I don't think that ever happened. So if Sarah Faulkner, if you could possibly see if that's possible, I'd be very grateful, because it was really talk, and I think we'd like to see those slides. Also a clarification from Fergus, if possible, about the source apportionment detail around the CSOs and where the 2% resides within the 25% or the 9% other. I think at the meeting, it was my impression was that it was within the 25%, but I think subsequently it's now in the other. It's a moot point, but nevertheless,
that's correct, Councillor. It is within the other. Yes, it's shown in that.
Thank you. That's fantastic. And David Lee, are you on the call? There was a question from Tom Tibbets that you were going to get back to him.
Yeah, I've done that. Thank you.
Did you pick that up?
Yeah.
Okay. And is there anything else? Oh yeah, and there was a really interesting discussion around whether or not you could disaggregate housing and agriculture within the plan. And I'm aware that responses were given by Natural England to that interesting question. So I think that's all I have to say on the minutes. And is everyone satisfied with that? Thank you. Okay, so now we will move on to a presentation and discussion, hopefully with John Reid from Avara. Is John Reid present? Yes, he is.
Yeah, good afternoon.
On the list there. Hello. Thank you very much for attending. It's You're very welcome to the board, and we're grateful that you've attended. So over to you for a brief overview of and what steps they're taking.
Yeah, so it's not a formal presentation, it's just me talking, and happy obviously to take any questions as well. So really just from where we started, we've been looking at the phosphate situation for a number of years now. And the two early bits of work we did was, one was how could we reduce levels of phosphates in our animal feeds, because what goes in comes out. And that's something that we've done. And we're reasonably confident that if you took the last 3 years, any growth in our business hasn't resulted in any more phosphates being produced, because the unit usage has come down, although you've got to accept there's obviously a gross number. So that was really where we got to. And I think, and possibly now naively thought, well, we do that, and then our colleagues and our own farms will make sure that we look after the manure the way we do. I would make the point that all our birds are in houses, and the poultry litter is produced in the house and doesn't go in the river from the house. What happens is it's not, if it does end up in the river, it has not been used properly. And I think there's been a lot of misinformation about the industry and about what we do. Anyway, that said, I've said on a number of occasions now is that we see ourselves as part of the problem, and therefore we need to be seen as part of the solution as well. And very clearly, we're looking at predominantly the manures that are produced in our supply chain and what we could do. Now, what's been really short has been a lack of data or information or facts. The only facts that we've got is that the rivers aren't to the state they need to be and aren't meeting their consent levels. Beyond that, actually, we have very little information. I think since the last lockdown finished, we've put a lot more now energy behind this to try and understand it and start deciding what solutions we think we can have. I have to say, what's been a bit of a change for us, and hopefully for others, is the work that Lancaster has been doing, because it started to bring some science and some facts into this whole conversation. So I think that's particularly motivated us and a number of people. Once you can see something, you can see some numbers, you can start doing something about it. So I'm very supportive of the work, and will continue to be supportive of the work that Lancaster are doing. We are working with Wyonusk as well as because what we've got to look for are solutions within the catchment area. I think it is fair to say that what we're trying to look at from an Avara point of view is, can we come to a solution that none of the manure produced from our chickens in the catchment area needs to go to land. So that is our objective. And we are now working on a number of ideas. Basically, if you don't put it to land, and there will be some times when there is good reason to do it, but one where the soil allows you to and the crop requires it. Beyond that, it shouldn't go on the land. I think what we need to look at is either you can export it. I think long term in the sustainability world, trucking poultry manure around the country probably isn't the right thing to do, but that's one thing that we can do, and do some of it anyway in the short term. We have been looking at the other two alternatives, which really are either combustion, so that you can produce it through combined heat and power plants. One project, as you will all know, has been on the books for a number of years, and I'm hugely disappointed it's still in the long grass and hasn't been progressed to the stage where I think we should have had it. which was a great sustainability solution for Hereford. Anyway, that's on the go, so hopefully that will progress. And I think maybe had some conversations at the last meeting. I think the other area that we've got more interested in is anaerobic digestion. I think on hindsight, what we've produced to date has been limited. We put them up, or people put them up for renewable energy, but potentially kick the problem further down the process. And I think for this to work, we have to bring technology and onto the back end of these AD plants and take out phosphates where we can. And actually, I think there is the technology out there being developed that should allow us to do that. I can't get into the absolute detail today because I'm restricted by NDAs as we've been looking at this technology, but I think that is going to progress fairly quickly. So I'm hoping that we end up with what started as a problem actually becomes quite a neat solution of providing as we break that down. And we are short of renewable energies, we are short of carbon dioxide, we're actually short of good quality organic materials going into land. And we don't have the quality of water going into the rivers. So if we can get to that point, and I'm actually reasonably optimistic that we will, but there's still some technology things to tidy up on. In the meantime, we've been working with farmers both in our supply chain and others. And again, I think what we've seen since the Lancaster work, farmers can sort of see it and understand it a little bit easier, that we're starting to see a bit more willingness to take this on board, and that's really pleased me. So I don't think we're pushing a completely closed and locked door. I think the door is slightly open. And I have made the point to farmers that they are either users or producers, or in some cases both producers and users of fertilizers, whether that be manures or inorganic, and therefore to some degree it's in their control. And I think that there's a bit of head of steam building up on that. I've also been working with, contacted and started to work with the other major poultry producers in the catchment area. We as Avara are the majority of the poultry in Herefordshire, but we are in the minority of poultry in Powys. So it's getting the other players on board. So that conversation has started, and we'll be looking to see whether there's anything we can do working together or sharing best practice, etc. So that is now started. We are about to start some autumn workshops with our growers. We're supporting YNUS to do that with agronomists because they're the ones who advise the farmers. So that's going to be rolling out this autumn. So quite a lot going on in the background, and has gone on in the last 3 months. I think we are going to start to see solutions coming forward. They are going to require things like planning permissions and what have you. So the council are going to need to play their role in it as well. But I'm actually quite hopeful.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reid. That was brilliant, actually, and admirably concise, covering a lot of ground. I would be grateful for a sort of sense of timelines around this for you. I mean, it's been, but just sort of vaguely, just a sense of that.
Yeah.
And also it might be useful to get a sense of the scale of the challenge that you're looking at here in terms of how many chickens are grown for Avara, what is the tonnage of the manure and what is the tonnage of the phosphate?
Yeah, getting all these numbers actually, you think would sound quite easy. We've got a pretty good idea now of clearly of our own. I don't think it's as big as most people think it is. I've seen a couple of times letters quoting the equivalent of 1.5 million tons of manure being spread. If that is the case, we're 10%. So that's sort of the level. The 3 projects that I've talked about, if they come to fruition, and I hope we will see something going into planning in the next 2 months, that plus a few on-farm solutions that are already being built or being built would take all of Avara's manure. Right,
that's good. The 1.5 million tonnes, I think, the refocus that University of Lancaster, it was the way of expressing the 2,000 tonnes of excess phosphate. If we're farmyard manure, it would be 1.5 million tonnes.
Yeah, I'm actually really interested in the input-output model, and what I've said to Lancaster is as we tidy up our numbers, we'll put our actuals into that, because that input-output model is actually based on a lot of assumptions.
Yeah, agreed.
So we'll put our numbers in just to be a bit more accurate.
That would be fantastic, helpful.
The question that came up.
Because presumably that this reduction in the feed, that's something that could be that's not within their modelling assumption, is it?
Well, to be honest, a lot of assumptions are made off DEFRA tables, and they tend to be a little bit out of date. One of the reasons why I think we get slightly exaggerated in terms of impact, and I'm not trying to underplay our impact, is that we are using less phosphates in diets. Our birds are much more efficient in their conversion, so they actually put less out the back end as well, to what perhaps some of the original tables are. So all I'm just looking for is to get to a level of accuracy in some facts that we all feel we can agree with and get behind, and then you know what you're what you're tackling.
Well, I think that would be very welcome. Thank you. Does anybody got any questions? You can put your hands up. I can. Thank you, Mary Albright.
Thank you, Alyssa. Hi, John.
Hi there.
How are you?
I'm fine, thanks.
Good. Thank you for coming. I know it's a tough gig and a lot of scrutiny applied to you, so thank you for coming. That means a great deal. Alyssa kind of intimated about timescales, but I wondered if you could kind of go into a bit more detail about not only timescales, but where the money will come from, because obviously within the plan, in order a moratorium on housing to be lifted, the plan needs to be scientifically certain of restoring favourable conditions in the water. And without, I appreciate you've given us a list of 3 things you're looking at doing, but unless we can attach numbers to the phosphate reduction and being sure of the delivery timescales and the fact that they are funded, they're a little bit like fluff to the plan in those terms. So if you can be specific, that would be really useful.
Yeah, I understand that, and I'm a little wary because I can get very enthusiastic and optimistic about the whole thing, because I do actually think we will get there. It's about buttoning it down. Some of the technology we've yet to just ensure works, because really what we want to do is we want to take the phosphate out of the system. I've got very, very into circular economies now, and actually if we can take it out and reuse it, then you're not bringing more into the area. So actually that helps. Funding is an interesting one. There is loads of money out there. If you've got the right projects, and the 3 projects that we've been backing are all at this moment funded with external funding. There's a lot of money being put into particularly renewable energies. If you've got a renewable energy project, you can get money from lots of places. So I'm not unhappy at this stage that we can't fund. Now, clearly, as these projects come, and as I said, I'm hoping they'll come to planning within the next 2 months, then clearly they'll have to have a bit more detail sat around those. But as I said, the objective is that we want to get to the point that unless the default situation will be that manure doesn't go to land. So you've got to have a good reason to use it on land. If not, it goes into a process. Now, as I said, I'm only speaking on behalf of the Avara supply chain. I'm trying to encourage other poultry producers to look at what they can do. And to be honest, I've looked at it from very much from a Hereford perspective, and that's where most of our poultry is, and that's where we'll be looking at the processes. I think we need to push some of those ideas up the river into Powys as well.
And that sounds sensible. I would just say, John, that a little bit you're kind of playing catch up, because for 7 years there's been a problem in the Y, and I know that the focus now has become more kind of concentrated on poultry, but the rest of us have been kind of scrambling for ideas for quite a long time now. So I appreciate your ideas are in the future and will be funded in the future, but you're kind of playing catch up for a problem that looks more and more like it could be solved by you guys as well. So I think speed and urgency are things that often are missing from the plan. And as a key player within the solution for your sector, a sense of urgency is probably my most pressing concern, because I can't do I'm coming into a 3rd year of housing moratorium now for a problem I didn't create and cannot fix. And so I need other people to recognise that the solution comes from another area.
Yeah, and I get that, Mary. The only point I would make, we're all in this together. We all produce waste, people and animals. I bet you that we've completed our investment before the water companies have. If
that's the case, John, and you can put the numbers to it, they can go into the plan, then everybody wins. So that's all great for me.
Yeah. So I'm as I said, I'm not trying to say we're not part of it. We're accepting a level of responsibility in here, but I'm also pushing back on some of the commentaries that have come out that have said that we are the majority of the issue. We are part of the issue, and we will find out. So we'll be our part of the solution. And I get it. There is an urgency.
Thank you. I think actually as soon as is practicable for you to start to put certainty around the proposals that you have so that we can incorporate it, that would be amazingly helpful. And so if we could keep this channel open, that would be really, really helpful. Thank you. So I'm going to call now Helen Stace. Councillor Hewitt, you're not a member of the board, so you can't join in the, sorry. So Helen Stace.
Okay. Yeah, well, I just wanted to reiterate really what Mary said about the urgency here. I don't think you can just get away with saying you're not the majority of the problem. The fact of the matter is that the phosphate levels in the river going up have coincided with the expansion of the IPUs. And therefore, it's good that you do accept that you are part of the problem. You are a very significant part of the problem, and it's a very urgent problem. So we really do need those timescales. You say that one of your solutions is potentially anaerobic digestates. Now, my understanding of that is that all that really does, it doesn't actually change the level of phosphate that's rising. What it does is migrate it from the solids to the liquids, and what we end up with is a very noxious and very toxic digestate solution, which is much more readily lost in the environment, whether deliberately or accidentally. So I don't see that as a solution at all. We need something more than that. What you've done is you've taken your production of the poultry in the way that it's being done now is really, it's an industrial process. It's not farming. And what you're doing is you're taking your industrial waste and applying it to a farming system which already had deficient phosphate. So, we need urgent solutions to this.
I think, sorry, just to be clear, as I understood what Ms. Reid was saying, is that the use of anaerobic digestion in conjunction with technology to strip the phosphate at the digestate end, which would be something like electrocoagulation or something like that, where you can actually take the phosphate out.
But it doesn't exist at present, does it? Does it? That technology doesn't exist, though.
Yeah, it does.
There is technology that has been developed. We are trying to proof it at the moment, as I said, that's the bit that I'm covered under an NDA, so I can't tell you exactly what that is. But and again, I would push back a little bit. I don't agree entirely with what you said, Helen. This business has been going since the 1950s, not just the last 10 years. I think it would be fair to say that it has increased. Poultry has increased. This is much more complex. It sits either side of the border, and there's two very different approaches, or has been two very different approaches either side of the border. And there's been a big increase in anaerobic digesters. You know, I was a big fan of them when they started, because I was looking at it in a very simplistic view of renewable energy. What we were missing, or what I think we're missing, was the complete piece that says you've got to treat the whole thing, and therefore you've got to come up with the solutions right to the end, not just kick it a bit further down the process. So that's what we are working on. And that's what we've achieved in 3 months.
I mean, I personally have issues with anaerobic digesters, as seem to be a kind of slightly temperamental technology. They like to have a constant feed. They really love having maize, which introduces a whole other pile of disasters to the environment. So, you know, I would maybe a medium term, you know, but I think probably looking at combustion or pyrolysis would be.
I think we're going to end up. I think we're going to end up with a combination of small on-farm solutions, some regional process solutions, some around AD, and some around combustion.
Yeah.
I don't think it's not going to be one huge plant that deals with it all, and it's not going to be thousands of little plants. They'll all just have to accommodate that. If we can do that, we actually can take the poultry litter away from the land.
Okay, Mark Willamont.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just going to ask, actually, John, first, thanks very much for coming. It's as Mary did say, it's a difficult gig, but you're a very essential player in what we hope is a solution. And I know we have caught up a couple of times already on this. Just for the benefit of all the board members and people listening, there are 3 planning applications in the north of the county at the moment for on-site incineration at intensive poultry rearing units, each of them taking out about 1,500, I think, tons of manure each. Obviously, we're watching with interest as to how the Environment Agency are going to respond, because it will require a variation of a environment permit, and of course how Natural England will respond. But it could be very exciting times in relation to this. I suppose the question I was going to put to you, and it's something I've asked beforehand, is that bearing in mind we need timelines and key milestones in our plan, you know, can this be contractually required of your associate growers, the farmers that you work with? Can it be put in by a certain date so that we can actually know that certain things like this are going to happen? Because I think you said to me 85% of the chickens in Herefordshire, for example, are from Avara. There's 16 million, so I'll make that about 13.6 billion. That's a lot of manure. If we can really have an impact on that much manure in Herefordshire, it would be lovely to set that to some time constraints. Obviously, we'd have to go through the planning process, but it'd be a very good way to actually reduce the amount of phosphates going onto the land, when we know that there might be between 8 and 12 years, depending on what Refocus tell us, already within the land there already. So I suppose the question is, can this be contractually obliged? Because ultimately you're just asking farmers currently to come forward with their proposals, but can you make them do it?
The answer to that question is yes, and something that we will look at, but you need to have a solution. You know, you need a carrot and stick in all of this. We need to have solutions that actually farmers have an alternative to be able to do it. And then if they don't do it, there needs to be a stick. Now, whether that stick is the woeful actions from the EA, or whether that's actions that we put in place, but yes, we can, is the answer to that. And we'll do that once we have the solutions in place as well, because then, of course, you can enforce it. Telling a farmer he can't put it on the land, but not giving them an alternative isn't going to work.
Thank you, John. So I suppose what's happening with these 3 planning applications in north of the county, you're watching with great interest, as are a number of others.
Yeah, and there'll be another 3 applications, which I hope the council will treat with urgency.
Well, we'll follow due process, but if we can make things go through quickly, particularly in bearing in mind the positive environmental impact, then certainly if it's in our control, we will do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ian McIntosh.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, John, as well, for the introduction about Avara and telling us a bit about what you're going on. The reason I wanted to come in really was to respond to something that Helen said just now, and that is that, you know, chicken sheds are mostly to blame for this situation. And I just wanted to refer to NRW's compliance assessment of Welsh River SACs against phosphate targets, page 69, where it says, and I quote, "Recent media interest has focused strongly on poultry units as being the cause of concern in the Upper Wye, especially in the Ithon subcatchment. The widespread failures and sporadically very high phosphorus concentrations observed in some of the parts of the Wye require action to address them. However, the overall pattern of failures in the Wye does not support the hypothesis that poultry units are the main or even a particularly important reason for nutrient failures on the Wye." So we seem to be in this situation where we've got some people are saying they are to blame, other people are saying they aren't to blame, and we just feel that it's sort of not really particularly helpful. Ultimately, as John's already, you know, disclosed, he's quite prepared to accept some of the responsibility for this situation, and they're doing something about it. And I think that's perhaps what we need to be focusing on, really. And I just really hope that, you know, other organisations such as the water authorities do something about this as well. I mean, I understand that this technology that John's alluded to just now, that he's subject to an NDA about, that is going to be applicable to what their solutions are. But I also understand that there is technology that's applicable to, or that could be introduced to water sewage treatment works that I really would encourage the water authorities to start looking into as well, as has been the case in other countries where it's already there, up and running, working very successfully. So it's just a bit frustrating from my perspective that we've got solutions out there, we've got people willing to do something about it, but we just don't seem to be getting anywhere very quickly at all. So I feel like we're at a moment where people need the heads banging together really to get somewhere. So I'll just leave it at that for now, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McIntosh. Fergus O'Brien.
Thank you, Councillor. Just in response to Ian very quickly, we do have phosphorus removal already on 10 sites, and we have £50 million that we're planning to invest in this 5-year period for further phosphorus removal. If there are other technologies that go beyond that, that's great, but we are doing a lot already. A question for John, really twofold. One is, obviously, if you take the phosphorus out in a digestion process, it doesn't destroy the phosphorus. Can I just confirm, is the idea that you are going to recycle, you're going to remove the phosphorus from all your digestate and liquors, and you're going to sort of reuse that effectively to feed back into the process, so you go into that true circular economy?
That's what we're trying. That's what we're trying to do.
Okay, that sounds really interesting. The second question is, and I have we've been doing our modelling at the moment. We'd be really interested in understanding the locations, positions, and amounts of phosphorus you think you can take out. If we could actually incorporate that into our modelling, it might help inform where the greatest impacts will come in terms of Avara perhaps focusing, or perhaps the combined impact of investment from both the private sector in Avara and water companies as well. There must be some opportunity to do that there, and sharing information across that and building it in and updating our models has got to be potentially a beneficial thing to do.
Yeah, I fully agree. This is going to only work if it's a collaborative effort. And I keep saying is we're all part of the problem. We're all part of the solution, and we just need to pull our fingers out and get on with it. So I'd more than welcome a conversation with yourself, because, as I said, I think we've really got to try and bring the bring the facts together a little bit better than we've known in coming in so far. Then we get on with it.
Thank you. I think, yeah, definitely there's the combined or stackable benefits in greater communication and coordination, and so that would be absolutely fantastic if you could do that. James Marston. James.
Hi, thank you, Alyssa. I'd like to just ask John, and thank you, John, again, can I have my thanks for both your presentation and its clarity and honesty. I'm very happy to take as read what you said about there being, and in effect is confirmed by what Councillor McIntosh read out from NRW's compliance assessment statement about the sheds themselves. I'm happy to park that. It's what comes out of the sheds and where it goes that matters. And at our last meeting, we heard from the head of planning at Powys Council that Powys Council doesn't know where the manure goes because they're not monitoring any conditions on the planning applications they approve. So that seems to me to be a problem. And then the refocus work has shown that we've perhaps got 8, 9, 10 or 12 years of legacy P in soil. Now, if, as I understand it, EA and NRW are monitoring SRP, soluble phosphate, in the watercourses at particular points, what I've yet to hear is whether or not anybody is actually monitoring the excess phosphate on land, in soil, the legacy P, beyond the work that Lancs University is doing. So, I mean, Alyssa, I'd like to hear from John or from NRW or from EA, where is the stratified sample soil testing in the high-risk catchments so that we know that we can advise farmers not to add any more poo?
I think the refocus work is clearly can't be absolutely detailed by farm. It's an indication. But I think farmers do need, and a lot of farmers do, test their soil. And as I said, if you test your soil and you know what your phosphate level is, and you know what crops you're going to grow and how much they take up, you can do that balance, and therefore anything that isn't required is a surplus. You know, it is a change of behaviour for lots of us, and farmers included, to look to see. In some respects, it is easier for us to start first, because at least we have a product that you can actually handle. If you've got a tank full of cattle slurry, it's somewhat difficult to know quite what to do with it. Whereas at least with poultry litter, and indeed there is an amount of poultry litter actually being exported out of the area already, because you can physically handle it. But I think as we go on, and I think this is where we're getting behind YNUSC with some of their communications with farmers. As farmers see the evidence and actually understand it, I've been pleasantly surprised how they're getting it. When they've seen a bit of science, they can understand it, and then they can work it back into their own farms. And I think there's a number of farms have already started to do that, but there's an awful lot of farms to reach out to. And it's the ones who probably you need to reach out to first, are the ones who don't appear at meetings and don't sort of get involved in early stages. So, but you've got to make a start on these things, and and I think we need to do that. I think we have got a problem with the border because the approach has been quite different. When you've grant aided your poultry houses and put them in inappropriate places, in a country with 0 NVZs, and then you want to do a U-turn back, to 100% NVZs. I think Wales have got a particular problem. That's not saying that we haven't, because we have as well. But it's fairly recent. The legacy levels, which we now are starting to understand, it is not old news, or not as far as I'm aware. It's relatively new news, and that, quite frankly, has been probably more of the trigger for me in terms of getting on and doing something than it has been the endless letters in the Hereford Times.
Thank you. And at that point, I'm going to draw a line under this. Thank you very, very much, Ms. Reid, for attending and for your candor and your comments. And If you could pick up with the, communications with Dirk, would be marvelous. And as your numbers and data starts to get a bit more solid, we can start to look towards certainty. The board, or certainly the TAG members, be really happy to see that data come forward so that we can incorporate it into our plan.
Sure.
Thank you again on behalf of the Nutrient Management Board. For
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so now we have a brief presentation, hopefully from, I think, Nigel Berry from Gamber Logistics, to give us some insight into their business and their role in working with the, principally, I think, the Paris producers, how that had come up.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, good afternoon. Yes,
Hello,
thank you very much.
Thank you very much for attending. So it's just a sort of, what is it you would like to say to the board?
Well, Gamber Logistics, we are not Gamber Generation, just to clarify things, who run an AD plant. We're a completely separate business. We're a poultry house cleaning business. We employ about 20 people. We manage a potato growing group, which provides a local crisp manufacturer with potatoes. And my colleague, Mark Godsell, and I operate a poultry litter brokerage business. And between us, we probably deal with over 100,000 tonnes of poultry litter a year through the Welsh borders, Wales, right the way through central England. Mark tends to deal with the Avara, broiler breeding and turkey sites, and their contract grows in Herefordshire and surrounding counties, mainly west of the M50. And I overlap his area a little bit, but I tend to do the other side of the M50, and I go across as far as Lincolnshire and up into North Wales. So we're regarded as one of the bigger players in moving poultry litter around. Historically, we haven't really dealt with many layer units, although it's interesting, and you'll probably be intrigued to know that we're being approached by more and more layer units down the Paris borders, wanting us to get involved in moving their litter. Now, some of them are the ones on what we call a belt system. It's not really practical for us to get involved with those unless they've got manure stores, because they're only producing 15 or 20 tonnes a week, and we need decent volumes to make it happen. Now, I'm based near Cirencester, and I joined the Gamber business in 2018. And since I joined the business, we've exploited my contacts up on the Cotswolds. I've been farming based for, well, far too many years, probably 40 years. And this area around here is very thin, hungry soil, completely different farming to Herefordshire. Very few livestock, and the area in general has not had the benefit of organic matter. And we've been increasingly getting involved with Cotswold farmers who are and have appreciated the benefit of poultry manure. So we're also exporting more litter out of the county to AD plants in Shropshire, Staffordshire, and down in Devon. And we see this manure not as a waste, but actually as a highly sustainable fertilizer that just needs to be managed in a more effective manner. Now, I've got customers, be they farming, AD operators, compost producers, who are all committed to taking poultry manure. The farmers have the acreage up here to use it, and they just need the support to be able to use these increasing volumes. And that a more practical approach to the application dates, or a more sympathetic approach to putting up covered manure stores. Now, we accept, there are issues, and we want to work with yourselves and other bodies to try and resolve these issues, and that's why we're working very closely with Cobb Agri and the Y&USC Foundation to try and create a far more detailed litter audit protocol, which we hope various assurance schemes will accept. Now, it's early days, but the feedback from farmers and producers so far, and from the Y&USC, is very positive. And I know Kate's taken the views of the Y&USC, she's taken her views forward to the EA, and we're waiting for feedback from them. So going forward, this poultry manure, it has got a benefit, and it's just making sure that we capitalize on that. And given that's what's happened most recently with this fertilizer plant, and the fact that the farmers are replacing manufactured fertilizer with poultry manure, and this is manufactured fertilizer that's brought in from Germany, Eastern Europe, and what have you. It is actually could be far more sustainable to use this in the right place than actually buying artificial manures. So as a business, you know, none of what we do is subsidized. It's all got to be commercially viable, and we're making it work. And we're making it work. So that's in a nutshell really what Gamber do and how we're involved with the poultry industry.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I'm really intrigued on the litter audit protocol, and I'd be very grateful to be cited on that as it comes forward, because I think that's part of the story, the narrative that we need to get a bit more of a grip on, which is that, you know, where's it going? And how do we know?
We already,
where it's gone? And
yeah, we already as an industry have a protocol. So I know exactly what comes off every farm that I take litter from, and I know which farm it goes to, or to which AD plant it goes to. But we're taking that now one step further with the farming fraternity. They are now going to have to prove that the crop they're going to grow needs that manure.
yeah, that's the critical thing, is the what is the indices of the soil, and if we can actually get to, the sequestered indices, that would be really good as well. Of the 100,000 tons, roughly how much is exported and how much remains within the catchment?
It's not all coming from Herefordshire. I mean, I'm moving litter from West Wales through to Hampshire. You know, it's about creating a specialised market for it, and that litter is going to make organic mushroom compost. I have orders for the next 4 to 5 months of 10,000 tons outside Herefordshire, and I expect the majority of that litter to come from Herefordshire up onto the Cotswolds.
I mean, it'd be really useful to get to know that, because again, it's a bit like the conversation we were having with John Reed earlier. It's the better sort of data we can get, then we can move away from modelled assumptions and look at what's actually happening on the ground, which would be helpful.
The beauty of this area,
of course, the other thing is that if you're exporting it, obviously you're not exporting to another sack that's got the same problem with nutrient.
No, not at all. And the demand, this is a completely different type of soil up here, hungry, thin, brashy soil, and the crops respond to it. And farmers, they all like looking over the hedge, and the business has mushroomed up in this area on the result of people seeing the benefits to the crops.
This is the Cotswold area.
This is the Cotswolds, yes. Yes.
Okay.
Cirencester to Burford, around that area. Yes.
Right. Thank you. Thanks, Nigel. I might have Helen Stace, Heritage Wildlife Trust.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I forgot to introduce myself last time. I was just interested to say that you know where it's all going, and the farmers now have to prove that they actually need this manure for their crops. What is requiring them to give you to tell you that?
We're just trying to weld various bits of information together. At the moment, all farms have to do a manure management plan anyway, and they have to prove that what they're applying to their crops, you know, is needed. And we're now trying to just galvanise that together so that if that farmer
in-field P indices from them, do you?
At the moment, they're not obliged to do that, but going forward, we're looking to say to them, look, before I can sell you this product, you're going to have to prove that where you're putting it needs this nutrient.
Right. Well, I think the sooner that you can make that a real thing that we can account for, the better. I'm slightly concerned here it's going up to the Cotswolds, having worked over in the Cotswolds and being aware of the fantastic calcareous grasslands that there are over there, that some of this could be doing some other sorts of environmental damage, but we'll leave that to one side for the moment.
Well, I don't think the most of, I would say nearly all of this pretty well is going onto arable land, and the majority of it pre-oilseed rape.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mary Albright.
Hi, Nigel.
Hello.
I represent the small construction industry lobby group in Herefordshire. So I don't know if you know, but we've been under a moratorium for 2 years. So my kind of interest is in how do I help us extract ourselves from that. And I wondered if I could just pick your brains, because you know a lot more about chicken poo than I do. given the specific problems we have in Powys and Herefordshire with potentially poultry manure, John says not, but potentially poultry manure, what would your most effective solution to that be? Is it export, or is it river buffers, or do you think this incineration idea has got legs?
I think the incineration has got legs. The problem with the AD situation in Hereford, you are moving the problem around.
Yeah.
You know, incineration, the product that comes out the other end, phosphorus, which is, you know, it's something that can be easily managed. And I have a conscience. Is it sustainable, me moving litter from Herefordshire up onto the Cotswolds with lorries? It's probably more sustainable than bringing phosphate in from Germany, or potash down from Cumbria, or, you know, nitrogen being produced using vast quantities of gas up in Hull. So it's the lesser of two evils. I think that the ultimate aim has got to be to keep the transport of the product to an absolute minimum. And, you know, having a burner in North Herefordshire, you know, would be an ideal solution, even though I'll probably make myself redundant in the process. But no, it would be the most sustainable solution in my mind.
And then what do they do with the ash, though? Would that be something that then you would be contracted to take away somewhere else again?
Presently, there are 2 power stations in the UK that are run purely on poultry litter, one at Thetford and one at Eye. The byproduct ash they create a commercial product called Phosphorus, which is a phosphate stroke potash rich fertilizer that can then be applied where it is needed. You have control over that then. You know, the nitrogen is burnt off. So yes, there is a byproduct, but that byproduct is a lot less volume and can be sent where you want it to be sent, where it is needed.
Okay.
Yes.
And the other thing to ask you, it's probably a bit unfair, but would you say that have we reached capacity on livestock numbers in Herefordshire? Are we at the point where we've got a problem that we're now scrabbling to solve, as opposed to a problem that we could use as a kind of innovative way of addressing sustainable agriculture going forward?
I'm probably not qualified to answer that question, to be quite honest. But I see my role as making the best of what is a byproduct.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going back to central government. There's a willingness to have renewable energy, and there is a lot of money out in the bigger world. And we have one AD operator who's approached me looking at putting in 20 more AD plants in the UK. These AD plants, they are now chasing around looking for poultry manure, because calories per ton poultry manure is very efficient.
Yeah.
So ultimately, there's a home for that poultry manure, but then is the digestate that comes out the other end, is that going to be another problem that's got to be sorted?
Because I think sometimes we get confused, because obviously I come from a commercial world, a bit like you, where it's kind of business is structured slightly differently to most of the other people on the board. But I can see now that we're losing connection between the river quality and ecological statuses and what's good for business. And I always have to bring myself back round to, are we finding solutions to a problem we created that we shouldn't have created in the first place in terms of river ecology? So it's kind of a tricky hat to wear when I'm here, because I desperately want to build houses, but I can see that really the only way I can do that is if we fix the river quality. So
yes, and I think then there needs to be the bureaucracy in place to make the farmers in that area comply. And I think the bureaucracy is there. It's just tying it all together almost.
Thanks, Nigel.
Thank you. Sarah Faulkner. Sarah.
Yeah, I just wanted to support what we've heard from Nigel, because it's so important that we view this as a resource going forward, because we know that farmers are having to rely on imported nutrients that are derived from fossil fuels. So getting this product to where it's needed and where it can provide an agronomic benefit is really important. And it's really useful to have Nigel's presentation and John's earlier, so that we can get an understanding of how these chains are working, where this product's going, and how it's actually coming, it's going out of the catchment and providing other farmers with a benefit. And I agree again with Nigel, if we could come up with a solution where we could have more processing of this product to create, other sources of phosphate that can be used or exported to other parts of the country. That's in the long run, and it's going to reduce our reliance on these other forms of nutrient that are effectively derived from fossil fuels. So it's really positive.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. Councillor Sid Phelps. Councillor.
Yeah, thank you. Sid Phelps from Forestine. That's very interesting, Nigel. Just wanted to make a couple comments. Exporting the resources or the nutrients is a good first step, because AD or whatever else we do will take some time. So I would applaud that as a better short term. Anyway, I was surprised to hear that there are no NVZs, nitrate vulnerable zones, in Herefordshire. I can't remember who said that, but that's maybe why we had such a profusion of chicken sheds in Herefordshire. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, but sorry, I see Alyssa shaking her head. Maybe I got that wrong, but
I think they're referring to on the other side of the border, and then the NVZs came in lastly with the regulations, anyway, the pollution regulations.
So you do have NVZs, right? Well, right, okay, but thank God for that. But I used to regulate the Cotswold area, and I know the soil is very brash. So let's not export the problem somewhere else. But it does seem odd that Nigel would be almost becoming the regulator here. I mean, Nigel said that he's not going to allow anybody to have any chicken muck unless their land needs it, which is great. But I used to remember the AEA used to sort of check up on that on our side of the border anyway, and maybe without any staff, they haven't got the resources. But that, thank God Nigel's offering to do that, because it needs doing. Oh, just one last point. I would disagree with Nigel. I don't think incineration is the best environmental solution to this. I mean, it would need a proper analysis, of course, but incinerating, just burning it, you do have something coming out the end, which is some use. It's not like waste where you just incinerate and get rid of it, but using it for crop production has to be more sensible. But we'd need a proper assessment analysis of that. But interesting stuff. Thank you.
Thank you. And of course, one of the other byproducts of incineration is energy. So you get the whatever, the ash, biochar, whatever you want to call it, and but also electricity as it goes through, and you reduce the volume that you're trying to deal with. So it does have other benefits. Anyway, Helen Stace again. Hello.
Sorry, me again. I just wanted to change the subject a bit, actually. So we've been worrying about phosphate here, but there are multiple factors acting on the rivers, and not all of them are things that we measure and want to monitor and plan for. And one of the things that I was quite concerned about looking at the Gamber website was the washdown procedures in the chicken sheds. There seem to be huge quantities of foaming disinfectants and chemicals being applied for hygiene and disinfectant problems. And I wondered whether you could tell me any more about what's in these products and what they might be doing to the invertebrates and fish and what have you in our rivers, please.
That is a different sector of the business that I don't get involved in the washing procedures, but I can assure you that all those waste waters are collected in receptacles and tanks on the sites and are all managed in the appropriate way. And you can be assured
to the land and percolate through the soil and end up in the rivers. So what are they?
I honestly, I'm not qualified to answer that question, Helen. I deal with the logistics of moving manure around, and I don't get involved in the cleaning side of the business. And I think even if I did, you'd probably need somebody with more expertise than we've got to answer that question for you. But I know from a practical point of view, whilst washing the houses, all the waters are collected in tanks on the sites and disposed of as advised by the manufacturers. That's as much as I can give you on that one, I'm afraid.
Right, well, I think I want to flag that up to the board as something that we should find out a little bit more about, because that does strike me as being something that could potentially be a sort of co-acting problem for our wildlife.
Is that, Nigel, is that something that you'd be able to go to a colleague and get a little briefing note about what happens to wash down water?
I can ask them what the procedures are, and I'm sure that the EA have got protocols in place that the poultry farmers have to follow. But yeah, I can find out.
I think, Chair, that's something the Environment Agency permitting team can answer.
Yeah, indeed, I'm quite happy to have input from the EA if they want to pipe up at this point. But just to close off the conversation with the board, if we could get something on that from either the EA or Nigel or both, that would be fantastic. So I've been asked in the chat to clarify the difference between pyrolysis and incineration. So incineration is combustion with oxygen, so that's what you'd imagine it to be, basically fire stuff. And pyrolysis is managed thermal treatment, so it kind of it doesn't combust. It takes place in an oxygen negative or oxygen depleted environment, so it doesn't combust. It just kind of smoulders, and you get biochar as the product and electricity as the byproduct, and it is you know, something that can be used to deal with chicken litter. James Marsden.
Sure, thank you. Two quick points, and I'll start with your last reference to biochar, which has a potential positive for carbon sequestration in soil. In contrast, and this really is a question for Nigel, I worry about the spreading of manure to land, even where there is a P deficit. Why? Because certainly in Wales, in Powys and in the Brecon Beacons National Park, we've got evidence from the Tyndall Centre that shows that in terms of total greenhouse gas emissions, the emissions from methane and nitrous oxide are considerably greater than they are from carbon related. So in Powys, the figure was 66%. In the Brecon Beacons National Park, it was 48% of total greenhouse gas emissions are coming from methane and nitrous oxides. In other words, from manure, land use, and the rear ends and the burps of livestock. Big problem. So substituting the saving of the CO2 from the Haber-Bosch process to create artificial fertilizer for putting manure to land and releasing those emissions to air is potentially rather difficult, I think. And then quickly to clarify, and NRW colleagues will chip in if I've got this wrong, my understanding is that the regs that were announced by ministers in January that came into force in April do not apply in full until January of 2023. So we actually have a 2-year gap when there isn't a mandatory requirement for manure management plans in Wales. There isn't full requirement for soil testing, or many of the spreading regulations don't actually apply. So we've got a 2-year window when anything goes. And those regs are also subject to a judicial review by NFU Cymru at the moment.
That, yes, in Wales, but in England, it's slightly different. And also with regard to the manures in England, the manures are spread onto arable land generally and have to be incorporated within 24 hours to prevent volatilization of ammonium, etc. So the legislation and the procedures are in place to make sure that manure is managed in a correct manner when it's used in the farming scenes.
Thank you. Yeah, I would agree with you that the legislation is in place. I'm not so sure about the implementation and enforcement.
Well, yes.
But that's a whole other conversation.
I think everybody's struck in for Labour, so yes.
So I'm going to draw a line under that now. Thank you very much indeed, Nigel, for attending, for giving us some insight into Gamber Logistics. So on behalf of the board, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, so now we have there had been a kind of a certain amount of discussion around numbers of livestock in the catchment and how accurate how accurate that is. What do we know about that? So I was wondering if anyone's got any updates on that. I've flagged that up for EA NRW, but anyone else who's got anything to chip in, please chip in at this point. I'll add in just to kick the ball off that I had a conversation with Minister bemoaning the fact that we struggle to get access to the DEFRA data that comes as a result of the inventory, the livestock inventories. And she was surprised at that and seemed to feel that shouldn't have been an issue and we should have access to that data. I don't know if anyone's tried to access that data recently. It would certainly be the simplest way of knowing how many chickens and pigs and sheep and cows and whatnot we have. So has anyone got anything that they want to add into that discussion or any insight onto numbers within the catchment? Mary.
Sorry, Mark probably knows a lot more, but Shane said from Lancaster that the DEFRA figures should be available shortly now.
Okay.
But I asked the question if his numbers were being relied on by more and more people and he was working on the 9 million as opposed to a different figure, did that have an impact into the university's kind of outcomes? So Shane said he was trying to get hold of the DEFRA figures, and in defence of John and everybody else, I did say, is it worth putting in the other animal numbers so that we're not all fixated on poultry as a sort of main issue when it could well be a combination of other issues. But I think the DEFRA numbers were counted, but not because they come from the individual farm. Sarah will probably know. I think it relies on the farmer telling you that information, and because of COVID, they didn't have the same resources to double check. But I think given Christine and Alison's work, I think we can safely say it's more than 9 million, but we should be mindful that there are other animals in the sector as well. Well,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's why the question's being posed as well. It's not just counting chickens, it's also, pigs and cows and sheep and everything else. Mark Willamont.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to enlighten, probably a lot of people know this already, but from a local authority perspective, I suppose it was a bit frustrating how this came about, because I think it was the Riverside documentary, which I watched and did enjoy, the Georgia Monbiot, the work that others that have been doing on that kind of highlighted, I think, local authorities' lack of ability to recite numbers of livestock in their areas. And in fairness, the local planning authority wouldn't keep a list of the numbers cumulatively of all the livestock, etc., that's been approved over the years, and the Environment Agency permits some but don't permit all of them, so there's always some issues. But just for the benefit of those other local authorities are listening, if you have county council functions, and Powys will have, for Forest and Dean, that would be Gloucestershire, won't it? But Monmouthshire, if you're on the call, your animal health team will know the numbers, because there's a requirement for there to be a listing of any poultry keeper of more than 50 birds, 50. So, the small numbers wouldn't be particularly helpful, but certainly that you get a good idea of the actual larger figures. But when it comes to like cattle and sheep, although the animal health team might have access to some of it, the point I think that was being made from our council, Herefordshire Council, was actually the data was best retrieved from DEFRA and or the Animal Plant Health Laboratory service, because they're the ones that actually have the absolute key figures, and I believe that it wasn't available from those sources, so it was coming secondhand from our animal health teams. But so if Shropshire, I don't think they're on the call, but I mean Powys, ask your animal health team and you'll be able to get it. That's how we substantiated Alison's 16 million figure, by breaking it down. So well
is
done,
that
Alison.
something that Powys could do? I mean, I think it'd be useful for all the.
Can I just ask, are Powys actually on the call?
Have we got a Powys? We did have a Powys councillor. Hello.
Yes, sorry, Chair. I was
There you go.
yeah. Then for a minute.
The trouble is we don't have
I'm
everyone all
here.
on the screen at the same time.
I'm not sure what
Councillor
officers we got here. No, normally we have Peter Morris, but I don't think he's on the call this afternoon.
Okay, we'd normally have a
we just take that
representative.
back as an idea, because it would be useful to kind of get, you know, it's a start, it's something, and I think, you know, when we get maybe a bit more information, that would be more helpful. But it's somewhere to start with. It would be useful to get a sense of that, if that's possible.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be great, because I think trying to, you know, pick it out of planning applications and that is very difficult, and also there's no guarantee that it's even slightly accurate. So that it would be good to get as much accurate data as we can. I think that's a lot of the conversations being around that, and obviously I pick up from Sarah Faulkner that the numbers do fluctuate. Of course they do, but it's a start, isn't it? Right. Anyone else? Any comments on that? No. Okay. Right. So now we move on to an update of the work of the TAG, progress of the nutrient management plan from Jenny Gamble. So this is basically the phosphate action plan, which you should have received a copy of. So we shouldn't need to go through it in detail, but maybe a brief introduction if we've got someone to do that.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, I'll just give a quick update from the last TAG meeting. Unfortunately, I didn't attend the last TAG meeting, but it was chaired by a couple of colleagues from Natural England and EA. So thank you very much to them for doing that. Yes, as Alyssa's already said, the action plan is done. It's had several drafts and redrafts and more redrafting. The version that is out is it now. That is what I think will be published, and we will agree a timescale on the updating of that. At this stage, we're looking at annually due to the workload of doing that, and we'll put together a kind of timeline on when we will receive comments for that. So that can all be discussed before new information goes in. One thing that was agreed at the last TAG was that from now on the meetings are going to be kind of more focused. So they'll either be geographical area focused or topic focused. So it was agreed at the last meeting that the next one will be focused on agriculture. So there's some agenda items already on that to do with agriculture. What I'll do is I've sent out a doodle poll for availability. We just need to make sure we get the right people to that meeting. So it might be that some of the attendees of TAG have got another colleague that they might want to bring along, or somebody that would be better placed from an agriculture point of view. So just, you know, it's a purely agriculture meeting, the next one. And we're looking at having that either the last week of October or the first week of November. I think it'll probably go into November because I think the last week of October is half-term week, so we might struggle with availability for that one. And then after that, we will decide on another topic for the following meeting. And that's a brief update for me really at this stage.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So I'm anticipating that we'll probably have a bit of a chinwag about the phosphate action plan. So we've got hands up from Fergus O'Brien. Fergus.
Thank you. It's just a fairly simple one. My colleague Vivian Evans was at the TAG meeting. I know she brought the point up there, I believe, but it is one we said before on the nutrient management plan. It has a table which implies that we're not doing any phosphorus removal at all at the moment on our sewage works. Whereas in fact, I believe we've provided the information a few times. It's not been updated. We have sewage removal, phosphorus removal on quite a few works. So that should be available. If you haven't got it, if you just let me know, we'll resend that table to you so you can update it. But the table that's in there at the moment is incorrect.
Okay, thank you, Fergus. I will discuss that with Hayley at Natural England and check
Fantastic.
that we've got the right information in there.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Fergus. Sarah Faulkner.
So just to clarify, Jenny, will the farming organisations be invited to the next meeting on agriculture?
Yeah, I would think, I know at the last board meeting when Alyssa said to kind of slim down the TAG kind of regular attendees, that then depending on the topics that we would kind of call on expertise of different organisations. So what I'll do is I will include you, Sarah, and if you can let me know of anyone else that you think would be valuable to come along, and I can send them the poll and we'll get some availability.
That's great, thanks.
Thank you. Mary Albright.
Hi Jenny. Please pass on
Mary.
my thanks to the people that worked really hard. I can tell that somebody's really tried to drag the plan into a different format, and I appreciate the time that's gone into it. Who's best to send a few notes to? Is it Hayley, or would you like them, or both? Or
can you send it to me and Hayley and Jonathan Gilpin at NRW?
Yep, okay, no problem.
If you
and I was going to back up what Fergus said, that as far as I'm aware, the Welsh water treatment works upgrades have already started, at least at Norton and Prestine, because I've been very kindly invited to go and have a look at them. But you know, sewage treatment works visits probably up there on my favourite thing to do. And also the wetland projects you've got in are for Dilwyn and Cannon Pyon, which have both been, well, Dilwyn was taken out of planning and Cannon Pyon never quite got there. They might come back online, but we need to have the Luston and Yarpole figures in. So obviously at the moment you've got quite detailed figures for 2 wetlands that aren't progressing. So if we
yeah, we've only just recently found out that both, well, to be honest, I thought only one of those wasn't progressing. I didn't realise it was both. So
I think Cannon Pyon will at some point, but I don't think those numbers could be classified as certain until the planning application goes in. Mark might know more about it, but just so that we make sure that the data that is in there, that is the certain data, which the wetlands are only certain data alongside the Welsh water upgrades. I think it's really important.
Yeah.
Current.
If somebody, Mark, it'd probably be you, if you wanted to send me data for Luston and Yarpole, if they are going ahead or, you know, they're in the pipeline, then we can put those in.
Thanks, Jenny.
We
The
can
other things
take that, just to say, we take that on board, but we're not normally mentioning sites of the wetlands that we're progressing, please, on the board, because for various reasons we haven't made transactions, we haven't completed transactions for land, etc. So we try to keep the locations out of the public domain at the moment.
I thought that they were, the application had gone in, Mark.
For Luston.
Yes, that's the one I mentioned, but the other 2 are in the plan. So
yeah,
yeah, they're not private, they're in the plan and numbered and located. So, and the other things I'll send to you, Jenny, don't worry.
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you. Thanks, Mary. I'm just going to chip in here briefly, if I may, because I was reminded the other day, I was attending a sort of a panel discussion about climate and ecology and whatnot, and the state of the river came up. And you know, there's a deal of discussion, and one of a member of the audience said, what's needed here, what's really needed is that we have a group of people need to get together who represent both sides of the border and all the agencies, and we need them all to work together, and they need to have a plan. And I sat there thinking, right, yeah, that's a good idea, let's do that then. So the plan, however we describe it, the phosphate action plan, nutrient management plan, whatever it is, yeah, this is still an idea that people think is a good idea, but they're just not terribly aware that it's happening. But it's being looked to offer solutions, and I get that we cannot look at it currently to offer the solutions to mitigation, and that's fine. I think we all get that now. But I just wanted to remind us all why we're doing it and why it matters and why it's important, and to thank everyone who's put in so much time and effort and energy into getting it right. I've got 1 or 2 little notes. One is the description of the why on page 5, which describes it with extensive ranunculus beds. I think perhaps that needs some degree of qualification in the light of the loss of 97% of the ranunculus or thereabouts. It seems that it's inappropriate to refer to something that's been so impacted. And there is a sense, which I think I mentioned earlier, about it should be recognised that phosphate is not an end in itself, and I still don't get that, and why it isn't. Well, why we're not saying phosphate reduction isn't an end in itself on page 6.
I think Hayley Fleming was going to look, because Hayley wrote that part, Alyssa, so Hayley was going to address that.
Yeah, it's just like, I'm just not getting it. I think it's maybe just a word missing or something. Anyway, I'm going to other things that I'm going to refer to later, but I'm going to pass over to Simon Evans. Simon.
Sorry, the desperate clabber around to unmute. Simon Evans, White House Foundation. Thank you for this. Thank you for bringing this forward. Could I ask for a little clarity? I've tried to get it from Fish Legal this morning. Do you know what's happening with the judicial review consent order? Because that could be a game changer for this. Jenny?
I don't know, Simon. David Throop is on the call. He might have more of an idea than myself. I've not heard anything about it recently.
No, I'm afraid you set me up, Jen. I know the same as you.
Okay.
I've heard nothing. And
I've got one other question, if that's okay.
Inquiries. They've not been forthcoming. I will continue to do so.
I was trying to make the inquiries this morning. The other question. The other question is, I know we've gone down this sort of route of these are actions that could be done, but there are some big picture numbers, particularly around the chronic problem. We've heard some really good stuff from Avara and from Gamber this morning, or earlier on about this, that we could wind into this plan. And there are additional actions that can be done regarding replacing bag fertilizer with biochar and whatever we're doing. But there are going to be barriers to that. And is it possible for certainly the TAG to consider going forward these big picture options, and what are the barriers that can be, what are the barriers to them happening and how we can solve those barriers, rather than just putting things in box marked too difficult and then not even going into the plan?
I think that's a good idea, Simon, and I think we could easily allocate one of the TAG meetings, you know, put a list of those projects together and just concentrate on that, and have one of the TAG meetings, you know, focused on those sort of other ideas that are coming through.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful. Claire Minette? Claire?
Yeah, Claire Minette, Natural England here. Yeah, just to thank everyone for getting to the action plan. I suppose the point I want to make is it might be published, but it's really, really important this is a live action plan. I think of picking up on what Simon just said as well, in terms of ensuring we look at the big picture things that are going to really help to fix this, and the barriers in place to do that. And are any of those things that this nutrient management plan board can push forward and progress? And I think that commission between this board and the TAG is really important. So that agricultural meeting is absolutely necessary and really important. As a board, should we commission the TAG to feed back on therefore the specific actions that they feel there are barriers that this board could help overcome, and any particular plans or actions that they need support from us to focus on taking forward? Because unless that action plan is live and reviewed and scrutinised and taken forward with the support of this board and the support of the TAG, we're not going to progress any of those actions.
Thanks. Yeah. So, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, we should have a very dynamic relationship between the board and the plan. And it would be very helpful, as Simon says, if we could identify where there are obstacles, because at the moment it feels like the plan has got, oh, well, these are the things we could probably do. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff, be awesome, but we don't know how to do that. And we need to get that to the point where we go, oh, it's awesome stuff. What's the problem? Why can't we do that? Yeah. And how do we overcome those obstacles, whether it's funding or resources or regulatory, you know, because some of it is really dippy and silly, and that we should be able to come up with a solution if we are just simply determined to do that. So I think that's really helpful, and the idea of the plan being a dynamic, you know, even more than iterative, a dynamic document that is taking on board and moving and growing and trying as much as possible to move stuff up into the doing phase and out of the we'll think about it phase, you know, because the obstacles that are placed that are in the way. Because actually I'm pretty optimistic that a lot of that will be, you know, is fixable, resolvable. Maybe I'm just an insane optimist, but I do think that a lot of this we can overcome. James Marsden.
Thanks, Alyssa. Claire's excellent comment prompts me to ask through you whether or not we should commission the tag to bring forward to a future meeting a set of metrics, a set of pathways to achieve the metrics and the targets, and a reporting framework against this plan. We don't have a reporting framework. I think the conversation that you're taking us through gets us to the point where we're going to need one. So that for the tag to think about if others agree. And then I have a question, which is, I had understood that at this meeting we'd have on the agenda the apportionment review outcomes. We don't have that, but we have some statements, some very helpful statements of clarity on the face of this revised draft plan for the Y catchment on apportionment. When do the agencies expect with De Cymru we will have closure on the apportionment for both the Y and the ask?
I would anticipate that that will come up in the routine updates on the agenda. I'm happy to take it out of sequence if anyone wants to come up with something now, but my expectation is that that will come up in the updates at the end of the agenda. So thanks, thanks James. But yeah, so the point that you were raising about monitoring sort of delivery outcomes, I think that's very worthwhile, and I would be happy to support that as a suggestion to the tag if they want to take that on.
I mean, we have got some clear targets in here that we're aiming at.
Yeah.
We have some actions. We don't have a totality, and there's no reporting framework of the what, where, by whom, by when. And so we're not likely to measure it systematically unless that's there somewhere.
Okay, so someone in the chat is suggesting that the dashboard could be the reporting framework, or should be the reporting framework.
Okay.
You know, which yeah, absolutely. You know, so I think we'll just leave it out there, and if the tag could just kind of think about that, and if the dashboard is they feel enough, is good enough to do that, then you know, fine. That's what it'll be. But I think it's useful to know, to benchmark where you are, where you're trying to get to, and how you're progressing is useful. Helen Stace.
Hello. I'd just like to completely agree with what James has just said. I think at the moment this plan doesn't really feel to me like a plan, because it lacks all of those things that James has just asked for. You know, I think we have to accept that the Y catchment, the Y, the lug, all of the subcatchments are failing in terms of the conservation status of the wildlife and ecology. And this plan hasn't got enough action in it to actually even make a dent in that. I could have written this 25 years ago when we first notified the rivers. I don't think we've made enough progress. And on the subject of the dashboard, I don't think it's sufficiently detailed at the moment to do the sort of level of detail that we need, that James has described. And at the moment, I wouldn't want to adopt this as a plan, because I don't feel that it is a plan.
Okay, thank you. Mary?
Claire, did you want us to agree a kind of agenda brief now, do you mean, for the next tag, given that it's going to be relatively soon, or do you want to do that offline? Or
I think I would prefer that to be offline, just on account of this is a really full agenda.
Yeah,
if that's possible.
I think that needs to be carried forward as an action though, because there's a short time frame between the next tag by the sounds of it. So
yeah,
there'll be a lot to cover within an agricultural remit. And I guess the more notice you have, the better. But I think that's quite a good starting point, because I think I identified about 7 different measurements of the gap that was required to be closed by agriculture. So it goes from 13 to 20%, 20 to 30%, 90%, 7.7 kilograms. We need to identify how much phosphate do we need to take out, and how do we do it, and then prove how we've done it by monitoring, enforcement, regulation, whatever it is, and then tick that box off. It's still too vague, but we should know. We do know that we've got too much phosphate. We know how it gets to the river. We know the problem with the soil and the ecology and the habitats. And yet we're all being a little bit too polite about how we reduce that. Nobody was polite in October 2019 when they gave me a letter overnight and said, stop working. So I'm asking you, we don't need to be polite anymore. Everybody, you know, John's been here, Nigel's here. They all agree that something can be done. So let's not try and fudge the numbers, or not fudge the numbers, but kind of confuse the numbers. Let's be really specific and give them something to work to. And then if they can't do it, that's another question altogether. But they sounded as if they can and they want to. So let's put it in a form that can be achieved. And then the river might just surprise us all.
Thanks, Mary. Claire?
Yeah, I would support that. And I think in terms of the dashboard is meant to be the reporting framework. And I appreciate that some people might not find it's adequate. But I would say the action plan, we've got this far, and it's about using that in the way that Mary said and the tag said. So the action plan will, if we use it correctly and it then gets populated with the actions and with the information that is going to take us forward, then it does become that reporting framework. So I really appreciate at the moment that when you read it, it doesn't read like that. You have to get to page 41 before there's that calculation of a project that's happening that's taking phosphate out and the amount of calculation per day. What we want is more of the action plan to look like that, more of the action plan to have those certainties in, and for the tagged group to be really clear about actions, the blockers they feel that this nutrient management plan board can help with and what is needed to unblock those. And as it begins to be populated like that, it will look more like an action plan that's going to deliver. And I would rather us focus on that, focus on the effort that's really gone into that so far, rather than try and create something else again. So that would be my plea to the tag and the action plan and for the board.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that. Jim Hicks.
Thank you, Alyssa. Yeah, just to follow up on Claire's point about focus, actually, I think reading through the latest draft, there's still a lot in there, which is apparently voluntary, apparently not capable of delivering certainty. And I just question why a lot of those measures remain in the plan if they're not going to be measurable or able to deliver certainty. Are we not better removing them from the plan? I'm not saying abandon them if they can do some good things for the overall objective, but I question whether they should be in the plan and whether we not be better focusing on a smaller number of actions that will deliver certainty rather than this big kind of scattergun approach, which seems untargeted to me, especially with regard to the agricultural measures.
Thanks. Well, I guess that's something that the TAG will have to consider at the next meeting when they're going to be focusing on agriculture and the appropriate balance between voluntary measures, regulatory measures, and any other measures. And one thing that is slightly concerning me, is an element in all of these discussions which is often not sufficiently evident, which is time. And the timeliness of things, and whether or not we proceed in a sequential pattern of try this, and if that doesn't work, we'll try this, and if that doesn't work, we'll try this, or whether we actually overlap actions within the plan, because in my view, to indulge in an extended metaphor, the band is playing a bite with me, and the last flare has been fired. And Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet are climbing over the bow rails, and we need to not be rearranging the furniture. We need to have a sense of urgency about this. So, there is a suggestion in the plan, and it's a good one, from Farm Herefordshire that something like the Axe catchment project needs to take place, and I support that. It's a very good thing, but it needs to happen as well as doing other things. And I think the suggestion is that happens, and then on the back of that, we might consider, the regulatory position and other regulatory things that we might do subsequent to that. But I think actually we need to start getting comfortable with the idea that some of these things overlap and that hopefully, never come to pass, but that we nevertheless are prepared to take those additional steps. If that's that would be my view. So we can't just rely on. I actually dug up some really interesting numbers on the model success rates of voluntary measures and regulatory measures, and the whole kind of raft of measures contained in the EA publication from October 2019, Phosphorus and Freshwater Eutrophication Pressure Narrative, which is a fantastic title and makes you want to rush off and read it. But actually, the modelling there shows that we should already have a reduction that would mean that we could all pack up and go home. But clearly, it's not happening. So there's something kind of amiss here, and I think that's a problem that we have. That when you've modelled what should be happening, it's not happening. So I'll stop rambling on now. Jenny Campbell.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to come in on to follow up Claire's comment, really. Looking at I appreciate the comments around, there's a lot of things mentioned in the action plan and a lack of figures and, dates and things. To be kind of honest, the only things that we have got facts and figures and, well, I was going to say possible dates, but we haven't really got the dates, are, obviously we've got dates and figures for the work that Welsh Water are planning and the work, the work that they're undertaking, and that's modelled, and we know the phosphate, that's going to be reduced from that work. And then we've got wetlands. And at the moment, that is it. There is nothing else that we have been provided information on with figures. So whether the Avara work, that can be included further down the line. But we have only got wetlands and sewage works at the moment. And Hayley at Natural England has, as Claire said, page 41, we've got the phosphate gap, and we've got, what the reduction will be from some of those integrated wetlands, and then the remaining gap. Obviously, that's already out of date because one of those wetlands has fallen through. But, we have included all the other measures, and there's a lot of information in there about agriculture, but we're never going to get over the issue of the certainty and the being able to prove how effective all of that agricultural work is. We could visit every single farm in Herefordshire. We could, if we suddenly had 500 environment officers, and visited everywhere, but we cannot put figures in the action plan that are certain enough to be the equivalent of the Welsh Water figures or the wetlands figures, because it's just, it will reduce the phosphate in the catchment, and we know that, but we cannot, we are never going to get that certainty of information that we can put in the plan. So it will be projects and things like, burning of litter or, things that come along that, we can add to this plan. But at the moment, everything that we've got figures for is in the plan, and it's only two different things. So it's not that we don't want to put facts and figures in the plan, it's just they're not out there. They're not available. So it's a really difficult situation because there's a lot going on with agriculture, but it's not quantifiable as such.
Yeah, understood. Thanks, Jenny. Simon Evans.
I was just musing about this as we go through that there's top-down and bottom-up processes, and very often agriculture is caught best from bottom-up. So the best ideas are coming from the farming community, and once you empower them, then they come up with a solution, or they come up with a supply chain, or that's where this is going to come from. And top-down instruction is not always the best way of doing it. Now you can put urgency on this, i.e., you can set targets for reaching X by Y, but the actual delivery of the solution very often comes best from the people who own the solution and want to own the solution. And I always come back to the point. It's better to have someone who owns the problem, someone who's part of the problem, who owns the problem and can see how they can be the solution, because that's the way you get things done, rather than telling people that they are the problem and then things not happening. And I've probably got Sarah chirping at this point, but it's in terms of doing it in terms of this plan happening, it's almost a case of catching and recording the process and progress against it, working out the places where we can go better on this for the people who don't respond to plans, and then putting a plan in for the issues that require plans. So in terms of regulation, in terms of getting stuff through Ofwat, that type of stuff. Is that, have I made sense or? No, okay, I'll stop at that point.
Sarah's nodding.
What I'm trying to do.
Yeah, no, you do make sense, Simon.
No, sorry, I'll stop.
It's just there is a frustration over the difficulty, and it is difficult. There isn't any easy answers here, but the difficulties in agricultural diffuse, in finding a plan that works, and in being able to evidence the efficacy of those actions, and it is very difficult.
The point.
Sorry.
Sorry, just quickly. The point is that we've only just really got the knowledge of the pathway for this. So we've only just got the knowledge for the pathway of this. The actions will come from it.
Okay, thanks, Simon. Sarah Faulkner. Sarah?
Yeah, I was just going to reply to Jim's original point, but I think Jenny and Simon have done that too. And I think, the fundamental issue is that you've got to remember you're dealing with thousands of businesses on different scales, operating in different environments commercially. So the important thing is that encouraging them to take lots of small steps and implement lots of small measures which collectively amount to a reduction in phosphate and a reduction in loading and hitting the river, and that's the crucial thing. And I think that the difficulty is, there isn't one sort of magic wand that you can wave. There isn't one set of legislation. It's multiple sets of legislation and how they sort of integrate together that's actually going to get people towards a target. I think for me, the problem that I have with the action plan and actually going out and talking to we've not been involved in those tag meetings, we don't have the thorough understanding of what this means that the other members of the tag group have. So there isn't that farm business, voice in there, looking at how some of these measures may or may not be implemented in a commercial farm business environment. And that's a bit, for us, I mean, I know we've talked about this before, but that's a big problem because we've got expertise that we can add into this that would help potentially this be deliverable. So, yeah, that's just a little sort of a plea from us, really.
Okay, thank you. Jim Hicks.
Thank you again. Yeah, Sarah, just to be clear, I wasn't advocating at all that the voluntary or the good kind of ground up agricultural actions are scrapped and aren't taken forward. I think the point I was trying to raise really is more that it's not so much difficult but impossible, isn't it? Because if Natural England won't sign up the plan without certainty, and what we're saying is that none of these actions, however well-intentioned or well-organized, none of these actions can actually add up to certainty, then isn't the whole exercise doomed to failure? And isn't a different question need to be doesn't a different question need to be asked of potentially of government, of what? There's a bigger question here that I don't think the plan can resolve, because it's not just a difficult situation, it seems to me an impossible one. I'm absolutely not saying that all of these ground up things should be abandoned. I'm really not saying that. I don't think anyone would subscribe to that. It just seems an impossible situation to resolve. If Natural England require scientific certainty, what we're saying is none of these actions together can deliver that, then aren't we better off just saying, literally everybody just stopping and saying, right, this is not possible. We need
I think, Jim, the thing is that you're looking at the plan as a potential mitigation, and I think they made it very abundantly clear in this draft that is simply not possible at the moment because of this gapping in understanding. So we'll just have to proceed with the plan as with simply with river restoration as its heart, and mitigation will hopefully come from that in time, but we can't establish certainty along that, and I think it's just an impossibility at the moment. And I know that I get that it's a frustration and difficult, but it doesn't mean that the plan is worthless. It just means that it can't do that thing because it just can't do it right now. That's how I understand that situation. Anyway, I'm going to try and sort of move us along a little bit. If we've got something new and exciting to add to the debate, I'm happy to hear from that. But otherwise, we want to talk about the regulatory changes. So, right, Claire, you're still in batting.
I just want to say, I feel I should say for the minutes, it's not that Natural England requires certainty, it's the Dutch nitrogen case and therefore habitat regulations that provide certainty. And I know I keep repeating myself, but it's really, really important for people to understand that. And then just to reiterate your case, the action plan is about achieving favourable conditions for the river. Every action counts. As well as that, we have to try and do things that provide certainty. And in the interim and in the short term, that's around nutrient neutrality.
That's very well put. Thank you. And thank you for the clarification. Andrew Osbaldiston.
Oh, sorry. I thought I put my hand down, but it doesn't matter. No, it's just really to say that it's okay. Yeah. It was just coming back to the certainty thing. The whole reason for sort of trying to push the through the tag, the whole agriculture side of things was more around the treatment. And I still believe, there is no silver bullet, but from the tools that we have got and the measures, waste treatment is probably the biggest silver bullet we have at the moment. And I do feel that that's the one that's going to give us the greatest amount of certainty alongside all the work that Welsh Water are doing. It's the equivalent of doing that from the diffuse side of things. So I think really that's where we need to focus the efforts.
Thank you. Yeah, agreed. So I'm going to draw a line under that. I have heard and taken on board at least one dissenting voice about adopting the plan. Do we have any other dissenting voices at this point? Okay, so that's the majority view, is that the plan will go forward. Oh, Mary Albright.
At this point, Alyssa, I don't think I can support it because the actions that everybody just said needed to be in place they're not even listed or timescaled or funded or anything. So even if you could give me some of the money that's already been spent through catchment sensitive farming and the actions that took place and the result that they delivered, that's surely better. But at the moment, it's again all the weight on Welsh Water and housing, and it's just not fair. I know that's a word that's banded around, but I can't yet.
Yeah, no, I understand that and appreciate your point of view. Anyone else? Okay, so that is broadly supported by the board. We have two dissents due to the weaknesses around agricultural diffuse sources, if I can put it like that. Okay, thank you. All right, so we're going to move on now to an update on regulatory changes. So we had the farming rules for water, RPS 252. We did have a paper submitted, which I'm sure we've all read, from Sarah Faulkner, which is putting the NFU view that some of this is not only not workable but counterproductive. That we've taken that on board. So yeah, many insights there, and also I'd be interested to know, as I say in the agenda, number of visits, enforcement and prosecutions, and I quite like a kind of a routine of the board having reports with that are data clear, kind of clear data reports on actions. So Oz, you've got your hand up.
I'll put it down, sorry.
Oh, that's unfortunate. Okay. Okay, so who from the EA is going to give us an update on regulatory changes?
Chair, I think Tristan Semple, our enforcement and compliance lead, is on if he wants to have a quick discussion about the RPS regulatory position statement.
Hi, yeah, the RPA, that isn't the question that was just put out though. Is there a specific RPA question? Sorry, I'm not quite understanding what I'm being asked.
I had understood that there were changes to farming rules for water, and I would just be grateful for some insight as to what they are and what it means.
It's the regulatory position statement, not the RPA, Tristan.
The regulatory position statement, as far as I understand, is a interim measure until March, and it's to allow it is basically just to allow any continuation of Rule 1 as was previously the case. So if there is an excess crop need, that can still carry on as long as there's no risk of pollution.
Right.
So it's an interim measure to allow the industry, farming sector time to find alternative solutions to applying manure for winter wheat. That's predominantly what it's about.
Righty ho. And are you confident that the EA will be enforcing farming rules for water and will be supporting farmers to understand the implications of all this?
Yeah, there's absolutely no change in terms of a regulatory approach. If there's any risk of diffuse pollution, then that will be carried on as per normal under farming rules for water.
Mm-hmm.
It's really simply an interim measure on the fact that if someone's got manure, they were planning on using it as previously historically the case.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't have the storage available magically to do something else with it. So that the EA have just taken a pragmatic approach and said, through this autumn and winter, we will be allowing that to continue as previously,
right,
but not to continue.
Right, so it's a sort of transitionary arrangement.
Absolutely, yeah.
Helen wants to come in. Helen?
Thank you. I have to say I was a bit shocked by this paper because I felt that it looked at things through completely the wrong end of the telescope. So the whole paper argues about the operation of clause 4A1, which is that land managers must ensure that the manure does not exceed the need of the soil and crop on that land. But clause 2 of that says does not give rise to significant risk of agricultural diffuse pollution, and clause B says takes into account weather conditions and forecasts. And surely that's got to be the right thing to be doing. I don't think we should be arguing that we need to relax this at all, because these clauses are what we should be doing.
Right. Okay, so hold that thought. Sarah Faulkner.
Okay, so the reason that we've got this issue over farming rules for water is you have rule 1, which says that application of manure fertiliser has to be applied according to crop need. The issue has arisen on the definition of crop need, and the Environment Agency have been looking at RB 209 as a definition of crop need. Now that's an economic recommendation. So the recommendation within RB 209, the way that's been developed, it looks at the economics of producing, a ton of wheat. So it's all about yield response. It doesn't give you anything about, how you look at sort of wider issues of soil fertility. And what we're saying is that the current interpretation of Environment Agency, the way they're looking at Rule 1 at the moment, that locks you out from using organic manures in the autumn, which stops you building up soil structure. So we've been encouraging our farmers can I just finish? So, we've been encouraging farmers to build up organic matter levels within their soils so that they improve soil structure, they reduce erosion, they improve their water holding capacity. What this rule change has done, and the interpretation of this rule has done, it stopped farmers from applying autumn manures this year. A lot of farmers are so confused by it, they're saying, do you know what, we won't take organic manure, we'll go back to using fossil fuel derived fertiliser. Or the alternative is to go and apply it in the spring. And ADAS's impact assessment that went with this regulation showed that if you switch from autumn application of manures to spring application of manures, the soil is generally less suitable, it's wetter, and the increase in phosphate runoff for some catchments is really significant. Now, this rule change has been done on the basis of nitrates, and there are catchments around the country where nitrates are a significant problem. But one of the sort of unintended consequences is that it doesn't work that well if you're in a catchment that is sensitive for phosphates. So I wanted to flag this to the board because this is a highly technical argument about the sort of agronomy of cropping, but there is this risk that this could have a knock-on impact on phosphate, because farmers are either going to have to not use organic manures, switch to spring applications, which may not be as environmentally appropriate, or go to bag fertilizer. And so that's where we are. But there is a current, because of the, this was introduced within a very, very short time period. It's confused an awful lot of farmers, and there's still a live discussion going on at a national level about how we try to come up with a solution that works for everybody going forward.
Yeah, no, I understand that, and I read the paper, but I think this all comes down to the fact that the amount of manure in the catchment means that we're now using land for waste disposal and not for crop needs, and so therefore clause 2 and the sub clause B are the really important ones, is that we shouldn't be storing all this manure and spreading the manure when it might be going into the catchment, and we know that it is going into the catchment and into the water, because that's why we're all here, because there's a problem with the River Wye. So I didn't really see what the problem is about applying these rules as they stand.
I think, Chair, or to try and move on a little bit, I think this was a nationally introduced regulatory position statement, which perhaps is not that responsive to local need as it could have been. Hopefully, Sarah, we have been having discussions locally in terms of interpretation of it and the meaning of it. And I think importantly, as Tristan said, it doesn't stop us from regulating where it would be necessary to regulate, where there is going to be a risk to the environment. But it's probably fair to say it wasn't the finest moment in terms of introducing it.
Thanks, Dave. I mean, I think that there is a concern around the spring spreading, and if we could keep an eye on that and just gauge and monitor whether that's going to have an impact, it would be useful, and continue to work constructively with Sarah over this and our members. That'd be helpful. James Marsden.
Thank you, Alyssa. Could Dave or NRW colleagues on this point comment then on the mismatch between the situation now in England and in Wales? Because I said earlier, I think, and our NRW friends confirmed I was correct, that there is a 2-year gap until full implementation of the regs in Wales. So what Dave is talking about doesn't apply in Wales. It does apply in England. As I understand it, water still flows downhill, not uphill. So England, where I live, is the beneficiary of what comes from Wales. And yet we have 2 completely different regulatory systems and apparent lack of join up. So could the 2 regulators please tell us how they're going to make this work?
I can't give you an answer, James. I mean, it's a statement of fact. There are 2 different regulatory regimes run by 2 different countries. All we can try to do is to harmonise them as much as we can within the legislation we operate within. But you are absolutely right. There are 2 different sets of rules.
And it'll make it very difficult for farmers that have more than one holding, and one holding in England and one holding in Wales. Makes it very confusing. And I think that's one of the reasons why there is that transitional period in Wales. It's to give farmers time to adapt to the new regs. And as you say, James, the regs came in on the 1st of April. The changes to regulations start with things like when to spread fertiliser in Wales and make or store silage, but they will be introduced over the course of 3 years, providing time for farmers to plan for any changes. So the new regulations will require major investment and operational changes for many farms. I think that's pretty obvious, which will be of concern to the sector, and we will be supporting those changing needs through the incident management and enforcement response that we put in place. I suppose more pertinent to this nutrient management board is that they're just one part of the approach we need in Wales to tackle pollution problems, and the new regulations will not tackle soil or full nutrient management issues, particularly the issues of phosphate pollution levels in the SAC rivers like the Wye. We pushed and pushed for Welsh Government to consider phosphate, but it's very much a nitrogen-based set of regulations to tie in with the existing regulations and powers that we have under the Water Resource Control of Pollution regs of 2010. So there's a say, like I say, transitional arrangements. The first measures are already in place. And then there's more measures that come in on the 1st of January 2023, which in effect will look at reducing a total nitrogen limit for a whole holding down to 160 kilograms per hectare. And then there's other regulations that come in then finally in the 1st of August, which talks about closed periods for spreading organic manure with high readily available nitrogen, and the full sort of storage capacity regulations that come in. And of course, the appeals side of it comes in very much last minute. So that's the situation in Wales. There are other sets of legislation that differ across England and Wales. This is just, I think, the latest one. The transitional arrangements, to my mind, bring us difficulties, and certainly will provide for some degree of confusion within both the regulators and farming industry. It's not good practice, I don't think, to have to have this sort of tiered arrangement to bring the full regulations in. But it's what we've got, and we'll have to work with Welsh Government in particular to make sure that we are regulating, and we're talking to them about problems that we discover while we are doing our regulation.
David, while you're having these discussions with the Welsh Government, if you could perhaps get them to bend their minds to the fact that the problem is phosphate, not nitrate in this catchment, that would be helpful. That maybe we don't need a nitrate vulnerable zone so much as a nutrient vulnerable zone, or a phosphate vulnerable zone, or some other kind of thing. But it's a frustration that there's all this legislation, about to, appear, but it's not actually appropriate to the problem that we're trying to solve. Although we may get some benefit as a side issue. Anyway, right. Thank you for that. Moving on now to abstraction, the importance of flow. We have a presentation from, I think, Andrew, you doing it?
Yeah, thanks, Elisa. It's myself and Alex Hale, who I hope is also on the line as well. I'll just see if I can open a relevant slide. Can everybody see that okay?
Yep.
Yeah, bigger picture. Yeah, so basically, this presentation is really to talk about abstraction in the Wye. This is focused on the English bit actually, but just to give us some idea as to the levels of water that's being sort of taken out of the river, and also some of the regulatory sort of controls around that to protect, obviously, base flows in the river at sort of critical times, and also to look at opportunities as well for sort of holding water back and storing water. It is all very relevant to phosphate because the more water we got in the catchment, understandably, the better dilution we get for that. So I'm going to pass over to Alex. He'll do the first few slides. If you're there, Alex.
Hello, good afternoon. I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I can, thanks. Yep.
Good, thank you. Yeah, so I'm the Senior Environment Officer that covers the Lower Wye. So I lead on regulation, compliance and enforcement to do with water resources and abstraction. I just wanted to give you a brief state of play of water use in the lower Y catchments, and then I'd be interested to hear what this, where this community's interests lie with water resource and abstraction and what kind of questions we get from you. So the first slide we have here is it shows you the number of abstraction licenses in the English Y. So as just mentioned, we only have data for the English Y, for the lower Y, which is why when I come to show you the maps, there's no data visible for Powys and Wales. So in terms of the number of licenses, the majority, we're up to 80% of the number of licenses in English Y are agricultural licenses. Most of those will be used for irrigation. Move to the next slide, please. And thank you. And this is the distribution of the licenses across catchments, and no data for the left-hand side of the map. That's Powys and Wales. We only have data for the English Y. So the cluster of licenses are mostly around the main Y and Lug water courses. Again, that's explained by the fact that they're mostly agricultural licenses for irrigation. So these are agribusinesses accessing surface water. Although there are a number of groundwater licenses, the majority we've got are surface water licenses in the Y. And next slide, thank you. Comparing the number of licenses to the volume of water that is licensed for use. And you can see that that is mostly for public water supply by the water companies. That 71% is abstracted for water companies compared to the 14% that is abstracted for agriculture. Also a significant proportion, 9% there for industry. And from the conversations that you've been having with the board today, in that industry would include your poultry sites. A couple of stats. Sorry, Andrew, you're a little bit too quick for me on that one. A couple of facts about the water company volume that's taken. That 71% equates to just under 60 million metres cubed of licensed water a year. There are 9 water company licenses in the catchment. Those are held by Welsh Water and Severn Trent Water. 5 of those 9 licenses take water from surface water. The other 4 are groundwater licenses. So the volume taken from surface water is just under 40 million metres cubed. And they're mostly located in the lower Y, so downstream of Hereford and around Ross-on Wye. Thanks, Andrew. So this is looking at water use by sector. The red dots you can see are where licenses are for the purpose of agriculture. The agricultural licenses do include the new authorisation licenses, which now regulate trickle irrigation as well as spray irrigation that used to be an exempt activity. So those agricultural licenses, that the data has been updated this year to include trickle licenses. Next slide, please, Andrew. Just a few slides now to show where the volumes of water taken, where the greatest volumes of water are taken in the catchment. This map includes public water supply. So this is basically showing you where the big surface water abstractions are for public water supply. compare that to the next slide, which excludes public water supply, you can see you lose that. Bear in mind that these maps aren't to scale with each other, so you can't directly compare them, but it does show you the skew of that volume of water that's taken for public water supply. So this will include industry and agriculture. So if you remember that pie chart, those were the big chunks of the sectors and the volumes that's taken. If we move on to the last slide, this slide just shows agricultural volumes that were taken last year in 2020. So you can actually infer that this map shows as a spray irrigation map, because that's what the largest number of agricultural licenses. They're mostly for spray irrigation with a little bit of water storage. And because we're using the numbers from last year, those numbers don't include trickle. So what you've basically got here is a rough indication of where spray irrigation occurred in the wide catchment last year. Thank you. We apply restrictions to abstraction licenses when there is dry periods and restrictions. Low flow within the water courses. So there's a number of licenses will have conditions that will restrict what they can abstract when there are periods of low flow. And we control that by our network of monitoring stations, which are shown by the stars on this map. So that's our network of gauging stations, and licenses are tied to these gauging stations, and we'll notify abstractors when flow reaches a certain prescribed level that their abstraction has been restricted, either reduced or needs to stop. As you can imagine, this happens mostly in summer months, which affects irrigators, can affect irrigators the most, because this is mainly the access to water. Next slide, thank you.
I think it's me now, Alex, isn't it? Yeah. So, thanks, Alex. So that's really about all about water sort of coming out of the river. But what are we doing about improving access to water? So just to put this in some kind of context, in 2017, DEFRA published their water abstraction plan, and this is all about how we will reform and sort of modernise the way we manage abstraction in England. And off the back of that, a number of pilots were introduced. So the Y catchment is one of 10 priority catchments, and the reason it's considered a priority was because of some of these issues that have been identified. So it sits in an area of high grade agricultural land. As we know in the Y, it's also got issues around flooding, seasonal flooding, and restricted water availability. So certain times of the year, as we know, we've got too little water and too much demand on abstraction, and in the winter, of course, and times of high flows, we've got the opposite as well. Also, some opportunities to bring in some restrictions to protect the sort of ecological status of the Y under the Habitats Directive. So looking at opportunities around that. And the Y catchment, as we know, has got a great sort of group, a network of partners and stakeholders who can work together under the sort of catchment-based approach to address some of these issues. Also, climate change coming in as well. There's very little we can do about that, but it's how we can adapt to that and identify opportunities around that as well. So just looking at some of the opportunities, there's a fair bit of work going on at the moment, as some of you will be aware. We're working with natural processes around sort of natural flood management. And I know this group is very keen to link in with with that to see where in the catchment we can sort of look for more opportunities about, you know, creating better infiltration, getting water stored into the soils and into the ground, holding it back, and enabling, I say, you know, more opportunities around water resources when it's under stress. So a number of the projects that are going on, again, these deliver all these sort of wide benefits, integrated type benefits, and it just you know, represents value for money really within the catchment. You know, it's creating biodiversity, it's helping with economics, it's improving water quality. You know, it really does help with reducing phosphate at the same time if these measures are targeted in the right areas. So water storage, again, this group I think has looked at opportunities about enabling around planning and making, trying to streamline sort of planning applications, because I know that's always been quite a blocker in the past. It's always been quite difficult for landowners and farmers to sort of pursue sort of applications. So there's some work going on to try and make that a bit easier, a bit more streamlined for sort of introducing water storage in the catchment. Another piece of work that's been undertaken is improving water availability alerts to abstractors, and this is coming in, I think, in December. Abstractors will be alerted via email around water availability. Also opportunities for exploring water sharing in the catchment as well. And I know that some of the other test catchments, there's some good lessons learned from that. I know there's examples, I think it's in the Cam and the Ely ooze, where water sharing and trading is also taking place. So I think there's going to be more of that in the future to look out for. Just finally, last slide there. This is really very simplified sort of look at sort of the whole why. We take the sort of the can in the middle of the why. You know, we've got to protect the ecology of the river, the Q95, as it's measured at sort of Redbrook. If it falls below that threshold, you know, everything sort of potentially where you've got sort of hands-off flows, that will be brought in, and sort of licenses will be asked to stop sort of abstracting water for that. But really this bit here, you know, personally I feel there's great opportunities for taking more of the high flows out of the catchment and sort of putting them into storage. I know from some of the discussions already with some of the other partners, I know this is something that Simon has been looking at in, you know, with WWOOF. It's about, you know, tapping into those high flows, taking that off, storing it, looking for opportunities to store water in the catchment to enable less water to be abstracted possibly. And the opportunities around that as well for, you know, reducing phosphate runoff, and clearly that getting into the catchment as well. So I think that's it from us on that aspect. So yeah, are there any questions around that at all, or you know, points for discussion really?
That's great. Thanks. Thanks very much, Charles. Yeah, I mean, it seemed to me, one of the reasons I was interested in this anyway is that we you know, when we're talking about algal bloom, that there are a number of conditions that will promote algal bloom. One of them is low flow. So you think, well, here we all are obsessing about nutrient. Maybe we ought to at least acknowledge the role of flow and whether or not the controls in place to mitigate that are sufficient and appropriate and all the rest of it. So it's been very interesting to get an overview of what the abstraction rates are for possible use and private use and agriculture and industry and all the rest of it. I would have a question, I suppose, over whether or not the hands-off flow is the correct. Do we think that is the right level in terms of the overall ecology of the river? As the trigger point for, you know, other dependent things, and you know, I don't know, that genuinely is a question. Do we revise? Are we ever going to revise that? Do we look at it? Are we considering it? The other thing is that I gather that the licenses don't all have hands-off flow. So the ones that don't have a hands-off flow or local agreement, what happens with them when there's abstraction? Because I think it would be very nice if we get to the point where we truly are valuing water as opposed to seeing it as like a free thing that you can just do what you want with. Because, you know, I have seen fields where, you know, the rate of abstraction and irrigation has been such that it's actually washing the soil out of the field, which I can't help feeling is possibly not ideal, and that it would be, you know, and it's about valuing that. And I'm very pro the winter storage solutions, which I see, you know, there's one or two gone in around me that are magnificent, great big storage, and that they have additional stackable benefits in terms of biodiversity and ecology, which I don't know if that's, you know, going to be designed into them, but definitely the potential is there, and that's great. And the potential is there in terms of mediating flow, peak flows, and so forth, and that's good. So that would be my question: do we, you know, do the hands-off rates ever get looked at, and do we feel that's appropriate?
I can have a go at answering that, Alyssa.
Alex, yeah.
So yes, they do get reviewed, and every so often we'll update our modelling that goes into the Q calculations. From a policy point of view, it's the extraction licensing strategies that govern the HOF levels. Once a licence has been given a HOF prescribed flow level where those restrictions apply, they can be reviewed and varied, but it's more difficult because you've been given a licence, so that has to be changed through the legislative process, which isn't the most flexible. But what the strategies do give us is the flexibility for the licensing strategy for the next 4 years. They run on a 4-year cycle. So what we've seen most recently with the HOFs that were implemented for the new authorisation licences, they were given a new HOF volume, and that was based on most recent modelling that actually NRW did with the EA for the Y.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Just to add as well, Alyssa, the Y abstraction licensing strategy is being republished. I think that's available in December, and I know as part of that process, it is going to be in a more accessible format. And there is quite, looking at other ones around the country, that there is it is quite interesting reading, and a lot of that data is in there. So hopefully that will be the case for when that comes out in December, so that people can engage with that and understand what those targets and levels are.
I'd quite like to see that when it happens. Oliver, if you could send that out to me, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So all the abstraction licensing strategies are currently available on gov.uk. You should be able to do a search to access those. But they are being updated right now, and the new one for the Y is out imminently, as Andrew said.
Okay, thanks. Mary?
Now forgive me because I don't know anything about abstraction, but I think a long time ago Simon told me that dilution is the solution to pollution. And so I'm wondering what happens if you've got a lot of abstraction or really, really low flows over quite a long period of time, and the concentration of nutrients, or even the impact of that upon the kind of ecology systems that are basically hanging on. Is there not a correlation between low flows or concentrated nutrients at the wrong time of year in the wrong place?
And I would suggest there's a loss of resilience. It's the resilience that's been affected, the ecological resilience that's been affected by those, by your chronic low flows.
We did, Mary, as we tried to get it for this meeting, we couldn't get it in time, but we have asked one of our modelers, Damon, who's done a lot with the SAGIS and the SimCap modeling, to look at this. So what he's been trying to do is sort of switch things off and look at the sensitivity, the flow on nutrients. So I think that's pretty much what you're asking there. But he came back and said he said it's going to take me a bit longer than what he thought it was going to take. But that will look at things like, you know, if you reduce the flows by 110% of, you know, and have a look at what that means for phosphate, that would be quite interesting, I think, to have a look at that for the catchment. So that will be hopefully forthcoming, but he does need more time to look at it.
Yeah, because that would explain then why the lug is getting a much tougher time, because our flow is lower, and then why it suddenly becomes okay when you get somewhere else. It's not necessarily because the lug is a really bad toxic place, it's just because we don't have the right amount of water to deal with the nutrients we're getting. I don't know, but I'd be very interested to see what happens to kind of, you know, model how much percentages of water and phosphate, whatever, do different things, because that could give us quite a lot of ideas about which solutions in agriculture and land use are better to chase down quicker.
Thanks.
Thank you. Sarah Faulkner.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, isn't it? You know, agriculture is 14% of the abstracted total, but the conversation is still all about agricultural practice. I think the really key thing is that, you know, Herefordshire story in terms of horticultural produce and plays a really key role in the UK fresh produce supply chain. And lots of forums are saying that, you know, what we really want is locally produced sustainable food. We don't want to be importing horticultural produce from Spain or Chile or these other areas of the world that are suffering from water stress when we can produce it here. And we have a group of really engaged abstractors within Herefordshire. We have regular conversations with Environment Agency about abstraction issues. You know, we've lobbied the council for many, many years to try to get, you know, more water storage, more access to reservoirs, because that's what we really need to build resilience within the county, is access to high flows when they're there. And hopefully that legislation will change to give farmers the ability to take the water when it's available and then store it for when they need it further down into the summer. And also more, the horticultural sector is an unsupported sector, so they are really innovative in the way that they use water. So if you go and visit, you know, the strawberry farmers or the other growers of fresh produce, they understand the value of that water because it's absolutely critical to their business. You know, if you've got a strawberry in a polytunnel, if they don't have water for 12 hours, that crop is dead, and that is millions of pounds out of the local economy. So they use that water incredibly responsibly. They store as much as they can, you know, so it's not an issue of people just, you know, flinging water on here, there and everywhere. You will see bad practice, but you'll see bad practice, you know, in any kind of business. But by and large, the majority of the growers within Herefordshire are very responsible, and there is a regular dialogue with Environment Agency about voluntary measures to reduce use when the Y is under stress. So that, you know, that system is up and running and it's working really well. So that, you know, but I think fundamentally it's about food production, and that's why we need access to water.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, that's quite an interesting point in the chat, which is that, and I think it's a little bit like we were talking about phosphate. We were talking about cycling of things. You know, so things go in, things go out. So if at Oz, when you're doing some work on the impact of low flow on nutrient, it'd be interesting if someone could do a calculation of the cycling of abstracted water. It was going out, was coming back in again, and what the net figure might be. I mean, I haven't got a Scooby what that would be, but just an interesting idea. I don't know.
It's a good point. I did try to get it for this talk, but I couldn't get it in time. But
yeah, I'm
agree.
sure you probably got it somewhere. But I was just,
I'd
be, you know, it's just as interesting. I would be interested in that. It's you know, obviously, you know, water is needed. Water is needed to grow these crops, particularly the horticultural soft fruit sector. So, you know, that can't be ignored. So Sarah's quite right in that respect. But yeah, it'd be interesting to understand the cycling of it, really. And I suppose what happens in the interim, water leaves the river, water goes through a cycle outside the river, water is reintroduced into the river, or what else is coming with it? Simon Evans.
Hi, there is in response to some of the comments that have been made already, the water company have been through a pretty arduous review of consent procedure that has led to some significant license changes on the Y, and Severn Trent have reduced losses in Birmingham. So they're taking less water from Ellen, which has allowed the water company to use Ellen to prop up flows on the Y as part of their new licenses, and they've done a hell of a lot. For Alex, in terms of the reviewing of the abstraction licenses, there is a procedure here which is the review of consents, if you wanted to follow that. But I think in terms of discussion for this meeting, the key thing is the hydraulic residence time. in terms of how fast does water flow down the river from point A to point B, because that is what allows the algae to multiply or not multiply. And if this does not have a meaningful impact on the hydraulic residence time, I think it probably stays outside of this group, if that's okay. Thank you.
That's a good point. Thanks, Simon. Fergus?
Thank you. Just very simple point. We've and I'll talk a bit later about the sort of modelling that we're doing or just completing on the upper Y. So it's really just to Andrew and Alex, if you want the most up-to-date information that we've got and the most up-to-date version of the SAGES model for that area, please let us know and we will make sure you got files and the data and everything you need for that.
Thanks, Fergus.
Thanks, Fergus. Okay, good. That was interesting. So, Oz, if you prepared to do a quick update on the citizen science, where we're at with that. I was thinking number of volunteers, number of sites. I know they've just done the mob sampling.
Yeah, sure.
The mass sampling.
Mass sampling. Yeah, thanks, Lisa.
Yeah, good thing.
That was last Tuesday. Well, it wasn't. It was, yes, it was.
21st,
it was Tuesday, 21st. Yeah. So just as a quick means of a quick update, the citizen science group of volunteers is developing and attracting a lot more volunteers, which is fantastic to see. So a lot of great work going on there with the volunteer sort of network. On the Tuesday of last week, 126 sites were mass tested for a number of parameters, including phosphate from around the catchment, which was good to see. There was a map I think I sent through, or has been circulated, showing those sites. I think there was an additional 20 samples by volunteers at the regular sampling sites as well that were sort of linked in with that, and that's something that is going to go on in throughout October and November. So 3 separate events to support the learning that is being developed through Cardiff University. So that sort of support from them has been amazing. So there's 6 volunteer groups now that are well established, all at various sort of levels, if you like, of where they're at in terms of actually getting out sampling and sort of looking at the things that need to be done around that in terms of, you know, checking the sites are safe, etc., to take those samples. There is going to be an event later this year, probably around October, November time, where sort of all of this key learning is going to be sort of brought together and shared sort of more widely. So I think the idea is to host that through maybe through the CABA group, or have a group specially set up to bring that sort of knowledge sharing from that, which will be really, really useful. So it is popular. There's a lot of work that's been going into this. We now need to sort of consider the work that, you know, the results that are coming out of it to sort of determine where action needs to be taken, and, you know, the type of action that needs to be taken around that, and you know, managing some of the expectations around that as well. So that is really, really important, and that's what everybody wants to see at the end of the day. Ultimately, this work is driving those actions and the improvements that are needed, and help us, you know, refine where we're working within the catchment. So that's particularly useful. And you know, going forward as well, we're going to need some funding around that as well. So we're going to be putting in some bids for continuation of this work with some more funding around that, to make sure that it's, you know, it's sustainable and it continues, because it really is important. I think that's probably all we've got to say at the moment. There's been a little bit, obviously there's been some interest with the sort of comms and sort of media around this as well, but, you know, generally it's I think it's really positive, and it's doing quite well, very well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks Oz. I mean, I was yeah, I'm guessing probably about 400 or 500 volunteers.
It's certainly, yeah, certainly getting that way. Yeah,
which is amazing, really, when you think about it, isn't it? That's astonishing. So I'm going to say thank you to all of those volunteers and to the coordinators who, for whom it's probably become their life. They probably didn't intend that to happen, but it's an enormous amount of time and effort to coordinate and organise these groups, and they do it for the love of the river, and I applaud them for it. It's outstanding. So good for the citizen scientists. Okay, has anyone got any further comments on that? Okay, so now we'll have an update, if there is one, on the Llinfee pollution and the Kingsland incident from NRW and EA. Do we have any updates?
Hi, yeah, it's Anne here from NRW. Hi. So on the Llinfee pollution incident, what I can say about that is the file is now with our lawyers, and we're waiting them to review that file and come back to us.
Thank you.
Yeah, Kingsland's investigation ongoing. I wouldn't read too much into this because big, serious and complex cases do take quite a long time to come to resolution. So, investigation is ongoing.
Okay, thanks, David. It will stay on the agenda. Okay, so now we have the section for updates on actions taken to deliver the nutrient management plan, phosphate action plan, since the last meeting, starting with the WIASC Foundation. Simon.
Okay, I'll try and be quick. Then I'll try and be quick. I have got this as a written report, which I can circulate to members of the board afterwards, if that's okay.
That'd be great, thanks.
What WIASC is trying to do is we're trying to understand the problem. We're trying to understand the problem a bit better and play our role in trying to understand the problem. We're trying to deal with the chronic problem where we can, and again, play our role in that. And then dealing with the acute problem, which is more our sort of beef. And that's, first of all, working with farmers to try and wind down legacy P in soils, and breaking the pathways by how the P is getting in through a combination of stock exclusion, wetlands, trees, etc., etc. The other thing that we're trying to do is the river's natural buffering capacity is being removed, and it's becoming increasingly apparent the role that ranunculus used to play in hosting filter feeding organisms that ate algae. And for the lower river to be a deep olive green at the end of August was really quite appalling. And it's because previously the ranunculus would grow up in summer, and then that would check balloons coming down because all the Smulian larvae and the likes would eat the algae as it came down, and there was a buffering capacity on it. So one of the reasons why the ranunculus has gone is the extreme floods that we had, those 4 extreme floods in that 18-month period, and then it was checked by the subsequent eutrophication issues, or that's our thinking anyway. And so we are working to restore infiltration rates in the upper catchment to mitigate the extreme floods. In terms of detail on this, we've got a sond in on the Ithen system. We've got quite a lot of data now on total phosphate and soluble reactive phosphate. Got a request in with NRW for the flow data to allow us to put load on that. And when I say us, it's us and NRW to put load on that, which will give us a much better understanding of what is happening. We are also monitoring, we've got a sond that's going into the Froome as well to try and quantify the issues on that, which is one of the worst performing rivers in Herefordshire, and we can start to get the timings and what's happening from that. That sond is now in and working and starting to give data back. We are also monitoring sewage treatment works as part of our work with Herefordshire Council, and what is becoming apparent from that is the disconnect between the data on the Ithen and the outfalls of the sewage treatment works. So the outfalls on the sewage treatment works have got their sort of 90% soluble reactive phosphate, and the whole monitoring system is geared around soluble reactive phosphate, whereas the sond that we've got on the Ithen system, soluble reactive phosphate is very much in the minority of the total amount of phosphate that's coming out of that system. So most of the phosphate is coming out in other forms. And it brings into question what is driving eutrophication. And as a result of this, we took the 2 sets of samples of the algae in the Y with a view to trying to look at which species were generating the algal blooms. And we were expecting a fairly narrow suite of species, and we got about 120. It's rather more analysis than we thought we would, and so that one's rather stalled on staff resource, but we should be able to look at which species use an enzyme called phytase, and so by access the non-soluble reactive phosphate, and see which fractions of the phosphate are driving the eutrophication. In terms of the stuff that we're doing with solving the chronic problem, well, our role really is trying to build the partnerships and share the knowledge and get the people to act and to take ownership of the issue. And you heard earlier from both Avara and Gamber, there's sterling work that Kate and her team doing in doing that. It's other people's job to do the other things that need to be done. We're also, in terms of the work to solve the acute problem, it's all about, we're working with, I've got 9 odd farm advisors out there working on reducing soil loss, trying to understand drain discharge, direct input of manures, excluding stock. We've got the habitat team excluding stock from livestock from rivers to reduce dunging, and we've also got the ongoing development with trying to get wetlands as an operational action within both Herefordshire and working with the Cymru to get them going in Wales. And the other thing that's changed since the last meeting is we've been successful in an environment update, the NEIRF bid. That's Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund bid. And what this will do is it will develop the financial structure that will allow for private money to come in and solve problems where private money will benefit from the solutions. So we all know that current land use is impacting quite significantly in terms of flooding and nutrients and carbon and biodiversity loss, etc., etc. And those have net costs to other parties. And if we can take a small part of that net cost and solve the problem, then both parties are winners. And the NEIRF bid is one of 6 successful catchment-based models in the country, and it keeps the Y at the front of trying to develop new ways of solving these problems. I've got this written down in terms of numbers, and I'll share that with the group afterwards.
Thanks, Simon. And could you say something about the woodlands for water?
Came out yesterday. It's a DEFRA project. We've got a separate, it's not just, this is the DEFRA project for England. We've got a separate initiative going with Atlantic Salmon Trust to try and do this more in Wales, and we're harnessing what's happening literally outside my window here as well with Rob and Keith and Stump Up for Trees to look at in both the Usk and the Y how we can get trees into the landscape outside of the government grants using other funds and using them to break flow lines and plant them in places where it will happen. In terms of the DEFRA funds, as I say, it came through yesterday. It's a chunk of cash to get more trees into the landscape in places where they will help to cool rivers, where rivers are bare and overexposed to sunshine. And we can also use them on flow lines and plant on flow lines to be one of the layered benefits. So if we can get the free trees and then you can put NFM monies in, a bit of carbon money on top, and you can get the change in the landscape to get that flow line disconnected.
Good. It is quite concerning. I'd be interested in keeping cited on this question of the total phosphate versus soluble reactive phytase, because it would be it'd be very serious if we're if we're misunderstanding something that's that basic. I don't mean that.
Yeah, I'm afraid I do come back, as I've said in previous meetings, and has been minuted, I do come back to the reason why we're here is the ecological state of the river.
Yeah.
And we're using phosphate as a proxy, but it is the ecological state of the river.
Yeah, that's yeah, good point. Thank you. Thanks, Simon. Environment Agency.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'll stick to the knitting in terms of regulation and what we've been up to. So in the last year, we're up to about 280 inspections, which are based on risk. We've now mapped the whole of the catchment in terms of looking for high risk. This is in relation to particularly soil runoff. Of those 280 odd, 60 we've identified as having specific problems. They've been followed up with investigations with the land managers, advice and guidance been given. We're currently now following those up to see what actual on the ground difference has been made. And we have taken enforcement action in the form of formal warnings on 6 of those where the impact was significant enough. You've probably seen some stuff in the media about additional resource available. That's been made available via DEFRA in year. So across England, there's going to be recruitment of about 50 FTE of agricultural inspectors who are going to be looking at agri-diffuse issues. That's only funded for 18 months initially. We're hopeful it will carry on beyond that. And we've done pretty well with that. So we think we'll be getting around about 5 to 6 FTE specifically allocated for the Y and the lug. So that is a good share of that. To put that into perspective, we've currently got around about 2 FTE, 2 full-time equivalents, sorry, of staff resource that we're putting into the Y and the lug. And that allows us to do somewhere in the region of an average of 170 inspections a year. So starting from next year, that will go up to 7.7 FTE, we think. And inspections will be going up to 500 and around about 500, 550. So very significant. You'll see a very significant difference in terms of compliance, regulation, and enforcement if it's necessary to do that. We've also got some additional resource to look at cradle to grave audits, particularly of muck. And that kind of speaks to the conversation we were having earlier. We'll begin to see some of that start happening next week when we're going to be right into, I think, over 80 poultry producers, the larger ones, and we're going to be asking them for details of their soil analysis under farming rules for water, what they're spreading and where. Depending on the results we get back for that, then that may target some of our new resource in terms of what we go and look for. So we'll be looking into this issue of what records are available, what more needs to be done. So again, that will be a new area of activity. We previously didn't have resource to be able to do that. So again, that's good news. Oz has also landed another 50 grand, £50,000 on the back of, I think, predominantly the Rebecca Pow visit to put into farmer advice side of stuff. So we're hoping to get that onto a better footing so that we can actually resource that and put a bit of infrastructure into that as well. Finally, on the monitoring side of stuff, we have submitted a monitoring bid within the agency to hopefully maintain and slightly improve our monitoring network. We haven't heard from that yet. We have been successful in getting some additional national money, which hopefully will be put into more reactive monitoring, so SONs, that sort of stuff. The detail of that I haven't got yet, but that's quite good. And finally, we need to be looking at all the data and information that Oz has just articulated from the citizen science stuff. making sense of that and seeing how that can also drive some of our regulatory activity and further investigations. So there is some quite positive stuff there. Clearly, it's difficult to turn this into the holy grail in terms of how much kilograms of phosphate that's going to take out the catchment. We are going to try and work on some metrics around that, but I don't think it will be a simple process. And the other thing I would say is I think one of the main reasons that this resource has been made available has been the pressure that's been put on by groups and organisations like this. So it certainly has got the ear of government. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Dave. Natural England.
Yep, thanks, Lisa. So I wanted to give two updates. The first is an update around our catchment sensitive farming work, which is the voluntary measures where we work really, really closely with WOOF, Simon's farm advisors in the Y, to deliver farm advice, to deliver packages, to deliver technical advice. And again, we've had an uplift, promise of uplift in resource from DEFRA for that work. So again, that looks like it we'll be looking at the live recruitment at the moment for about 6 or 7 additional officers to cover the West Midlands and Wyve, which makes a significant proportion of that in terms of the volume of work. So again, some good further news there in terms of being able to bolster up the carrot voluntary part of this, you know, which, as others have said, is really about forming those relationships and building that trust. The other update I wanted to give on behalf of Natural England and the EA was around the Y targets. So as I updated in the last meeting, the EA and Natural England, in the process of river basin management plans, are looking at the targets, the phosphate targets for the Y as part of that review.
Sorry, Claire, these are the slides.
Yes. Yeah.
Would you like us to put them on the screen?
If you can put them on the screen,
Shared around.
yeah, I'm sure that'd just be really helpful for people.
Can somebody do that, Mark? Probably. Carry on talking. Hopefully they'll just.
Okay, and they'll come up. So I thought there was 2 things I wanted to address. I think the first one is everyone asking, oh my God, why on earth is this taking so long? You just keep talking about it and the targets are getting revised. So you know, and again, that came up in the last meeting. I really, really appreciate that I'm coming back now at this meeting and saying we are still looking at these targets and there isn't agreement on whether those targets are staying the same or whether they're changing. Those conversations are still ongoing. And that's because it is just a hugely complex area. And I would hope that the board now kind of appreciates some of that. The work that goes into looking at whether we change the targets is obviously about the ecological requirements for the river, but also the wording in the Common Standards Monitoring Guidance is around technical feasibility. And that's obviously also slightly more challenging in terms of then the evidence required around the technical feasibility and the evidence required about the ecological need. That takes specialist input and we want to make sure we do get this right, hence better to take the time to make the correct decision. But what I did want to do is be really clear and make sure everyone had the information of what those targets are, potentially what those targets could be. So this, the lug target now, the main column to look at is the one in green that says the gap between the latest 3-year mean and the current target. So yeah, that's that one there. So that's where we currently are. You can see it's all very red. We're not currently meeting the current CSM target. The one next to it, which I've put in amber, if we move to a near natural target for the river lug, that's where it would shift to. So you can see there what that would mean is that gap, that holy grail of getting the lug in favourable, is harder than it is now because that gap would be bigger if we move to a near natural target. And then if you want to move to the next slide, which is the River Y, and again, sorry, the green's a bit pale, but the green one in the middle, again, the gap between the latest 3-year mean and the current CSMI target, where the cursor is, that is our current. That's all blue. We're below that. If you then move to the amber one, that one there, that is the gap between the latest, between the mean and actually what would be high ecological status, because that's the most stringent target. So that would be the target, the CSMI guidance. You can see apart from one point at Home Lacey, the Y would still pass that target, but the gap, I don't like using the word headroom because it can be used in different ways, but that gap between it staying below that target gets narrower. So that would be the implication of that. It wouldn't go into failure, but it would allow us, it would mean there's less headroom. So that's so we haven't agreed that the targets are moving. The targets may stay the same. They may move towards a near natural target. I wouldn't imagine they'd move the other way, but and so I just wanted to be clear and share those figures so people are clear on the implications of those in future. And I will keep this board completely up to date with progress. I wouldn't wait for another board meeting. If there's any updates and progress in between, we would share that with you straight away.
Thank you. Simon, do you want to come in on that?
Hi, Claire. Just quickly, I looked at this data and a big alarm bell rang in my head. Your data for Redbrook is for a 3-year mean is 0.03, and I checked NRW's data for the 3-year mean for the other side of the river, and it's 0.058 twice. So how have we got two statutory bodies reporting for the same site with one well inside target and one well over target?
Yeah, thanks, Simon. And NRW part of the group, I should have said EA, NRW and EA, so they're on the target working group, and the way we monitor, and that's the discrepancy monitoring is also part of that. I can't give you the answer now, but that will be discussed. So I'll take that away and ask them to kind of provide an update of that. But NRW are involved. They're at the same meetings, they're around the same table.
Mary.
Thank you. I'll be really quick. 2 questions, Claire. When will you know which target you're going to choose? I know it's an impossible question, but in terms of forward planning for everybody and the fact that the plan already is out of date within days of it being written, I think it's really important that everybody agrees when you're going to decide on that target. Even if you would go for the harder one, which I'm guessing that you're going to, I think you need to kind of commit, otherwise we'll always be catching our tail. And the other question is the gap. To me, I don't understand if that's an achievable gap by doing X, Y, Z, or whether it means it's a long-term process that will never quite get there within the 2027 deadline. Is there any way of giving the gap kind of a way of other people being able to understand it? You know, is it 20 houses worth? Is it a wetlands worth? Whatever it might be.
So that gap is what we want ultimately the action plan to state, to be able to clearly state, right? So this is for the lug. So this is for the lug where we need to get to. This is what we're on now. So this is the gap in milligrams per day, and the action plan, as it continues to get filled with that information, will provide that, and therefore these numbers are that end point. In terms of timescales, Common Standards Monitoring Guidance doesn't abide by it's not restricted by the 2027, that's a WFD timeline. So our guidance and our national specialists who help formulate that guidance, the CSMG targets are always, they're a long-term ecological target, so there's not a specific deadline put on them, so they are long-term. In terms of when we report, it's not just in my control, it's just not one organisation, it's a joint organisation and decision. I can commit to trying to keep you updated and resolve it as quickly as we can, and also to highlight to to that group the importance of trying to make this happen and be clear as quickly as possible.
I think it has two benefits, obviously for us all working towards something within a kind of doable time, but also the river is really, really stressed, and I don't think there's any benefit to us all kind of umming and ahhing. It just needs to be done. And that's with my kind of Herefordian live on the river hat, not a builder's hat.
Yeah, absolutely. And these targets are about ensuring that if they're achieved, then yeah, that's the right thing for the ecology of the river. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Claire. NRW, David or Anne?
We're going to split it into two, Chair, if we may. I think Anne is still on and was going to give us sort of top high-level view, and then I was going to do a bit more operationally.
Okay.
But I'm.
Hi, thanks, Lisa. Yeah, no, I'm on. Sorry, I've got a bit of an intermittent internet signal, so apologies if I cut out. So, first of all, just an update on the sort of the wider work that's going on in NRW. So, as you know, the Wye isn't the only failing stack river in Wales. It's one of 5, and that has really sort of focused attention on trying to sort of tackle water quality and the prevalence of P in our catchments far more than I'm thinking back to sort of 12-18 months ago when I first sort of appeared on this board, and it was my lone voice, or felt like my lone voice in the organisation, just talking about the why. And now suddenly there is a lot more interest. So we have a very sort of structured Stack Rivers project with project governance, and most importantly resources brought into that project. So suddenly it feels like there is a real sort of head of steam and some momentum to try and understand this issue much better and start putting some things in place. So I think that has happened. We've got a project manager. It's actually now a priority in our corporate plan as an organisation, which is a massive step forward. And we're having conversations, at exec team level and with Welsh Government, on this matter. So it's up there and it's on the radar, which is, it feels like a much better position to be in. So very briefly, there are 4 work streams on the project. The first one is around providing planning advice and sort of position statements on permitting. This is a very complex kind of piece of work, and we've got the holding planning advice and the holding permitting advice, but that is evolving and it will change, and we're getting sort of some clarity and some legal advice on what's going to be happening with those pieces of advice. But I think what's really sort of helpful here is that we're trying to get better definitions on what we mean by neutrality and betterment, and not just in the context of agriculture, but in the context of agriculture and any other surface water discharges that are potentially contributing to the problem. So that's a big piece of work, but we have now resourced that work stream, with some very kind of specialist advisors and some really good technicians to support that work. So that's ongoing. Also developing some improved appropriate assessment guidance for planning authorities and for applicants. So again, we're recognising that it is difficult out there for developers and for people who are trying to get through that planning process. So we're trying to support that process as much as we can by improving the guidance that's out there. Engaging with the lawyers and the legal teams as well, because obviously there is sort of legal context to a lot of the stuff that we're doing and saying here. Second work stream is around water quality standards and compliance assessments. So we've revised the core management plans for all 9 of the SAC rivers, hoping to publish those this autumn. I know I've seen the updated core management plan on the Wye, and that has now been sort of signed off after some amendments. So that's hoping to publish that fairly shortly. They're saying this autumn, so hopefully I've not heard that those dates have slipped. And we're also now working on a sort of a wider compliance assessment for the other water quality debts that we sort of classify our rivers, our SAC rivers on, so dissolved oxygen, total ammonia, for example, and we're just trying to work out a methodology now to actually undertake those compliance assessments for those other determinants. At the moment, we've only done it for P, and that's what we published just coming up 12 months ago for the Y. The other work streams around water quality improvements, sort of monitoring and evidence. And, you know, we are having discussions around nutrient calculators and developing some guidance on their use in Wales. So that's happening. And all of the other failing sects will also, we're setting up the nutrient management plan boards, similar to this one. Obviously it won't be cross-border, so it's slightly less complicated, but all of those failing rivers will have a nutrient management plan board. And I know, you know, I've been sort of talking to the person that's setting those up about how this one sort of runs, and taking the sort of best practice from this one and the learning from this one as well. And then the other sort of really sort of good piece of news is that we've just employed a SAC officer for the Y. They're not in post yet. They're hopefully starting an NRW in the next couple of weeks. So we'll have our very own sort of SAC officer, and they'll work around looking at sort of working with landowners, identifying where, you know, we do need additional sampling or investigations into elevated sources of phosphates. So that's one of 3 officers that we're employing, but this one we'll have just for the River Y. So that's the wider kind of project update. And I know sort of the SAGES work you're expecting an update on, and I know Fergus is on the call and has a presentation sort of ready to go. I think he's hoping to provide at this. So that work has completed. There is some evaluation to be done so that we can get the best out of the information that SAGES modelling has provided us with, and I think Fergus is going to touch on that. And I'm happy sort of to take some questions with Fergus once that information has been shared. David, do you want to say anything about the stuff that's going on?
I'm just conscious of time, Anne, and what you've just said in terms of Fergus. I can just put some notes on the chat if you want, in terms of operational work that we've been doing, Chair.
Yep, that's fine, David. I said
okay, and we can move on. Yeah,
it's really, really good to hear all this, you know, activity, progress that's being coming about. It's fantastic. So, Fergus, do you want to do that, the SAGES work?
Okay, that should be. Tell me if you can. Okay.
There you
are. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, let me just zoom in a little bit more to that, make it a bit bigger. Right, I will skip through some of this because this is a slightly shorter version. This was presented at the TAG group, but there's a few important points to bring out. We've talked a lot of people here about this SAGES model, but I just want to explain what it is. It's source apportionment on GIS. Where's the phosphorus coming from? Where are the nutrients coming from? In this case, mainly phosphorus. Standard modeling tool, been in use for quite a few years now, but most importantly, it's a brand new version which came out earlier this year or end of last year. So what we've actually been doing is updating the version to this. It's got much better mapping, much more accurate, and much easier to actually incorporate evidence and data into it. It's very good at estimating how varied nutrient sources combine along a river to affect water quality on average. It's not very good at estimating or looking at transient effects, so we don't use it for that sort of thing, such as dissolved oxygen, bacteria, whatever. We have included, as we've talked about before, the contribution from CSOs, and we've measured this. What we're doing is we're comparing this to the JNCC targets, so the 2016 targets. So, pardon me, I'm not quite sure whether they correspond to the CSMG targets that Claire was talking about earlier on, but they are either correspond with the Water Framework Directive good status or are tighter. They're always at least one or the other. So just to give you an update on model, this is end of August. It's actually moved on a little bit from then. Sorry, I haven't just got quite an update on this one. What we've done is we've now delivered the calibrated model for the Y, and we're working on the Usk and the other rivers here. These are the failing rivers, these 3, the Dee, the Cleddau, and the Tivy, as well as the Usk and the Y. And then we're also going to model all the other SACs. But most importantly here for the Y, we have more or less agreed all the investment scenarios, all the various scenarios we want to test with it, but there's still a bit of discussion to go on that. We're actually rather further on with having run those. So we've been running those, and that's what I'm just going to show you today. The couple of important factors here, and it actually ties into what Simon was saying earlier on. First thing we do with the model is we calibrate it. So does the model give you something that predicts what we're actually seeing in the catchment? And when we do that, we say, well, what are the loads we're actually seeing coming out of our sewage works? What do we understand? What does the data tell us is coming off land, etc.? So we run the calibration against the reality. But when we run our scenarios, we say, well, what if not the works is running at this level, but is running right up to the maximum permitted load, maximum flow, maximum concentration it could possibly have. So we run the test against that. You'll see one of the comparisons about what happens if that's what actually happens. We also take a precautionary approach. So you heard again Simon talking about the proportion of the phosphorus coming out of our sites, which is in a soluble and reactive form. We're assuming we're measured and permitted against total phosphorus, but we're assuming the worst case from our point of view, which is that 100% of it is orthophosphate, 100% of it is very reactive and very easily available to organisms to use. That, from what Simon was saying, might be something we have to focus on again, but that's our best understanding at the moment. We've only got the modelling for the upper D because we've no new data. Before today, we'd seen no new data for the lug and the lower Y. So we'll have to look at that now if there is new comprehensive data for that. So that's something we'll have to have a conversation with EA and Natural England about. But what we're looking at here is the upper Y. Right, I won't go into that. This is the calibration model. It's quite small, quite bitty, but the main thing to look at here is the blue is the measured figures for the river in terms of phosphorus levels, with the upper and lower bands, so the confidence levels on those. The amber or the brown is what the model predicts. So you can see how close the model is to the actual. I think that's the most important thing. If you take nothing else out of this, it's the fact that what we have is a really, really well calibrated tool that, you know, we've used it for a certain amount now, but we can use this for other things as well. As we just started having that discussion with Avara as well. Great, let's start considering what that could do if we start building that into the model as well. Right, we started running, okay, I won't go into it's a very good fit, etc. We've run a number of ways of actually we can visualize the results. Now, I believe at the TAG meeting, and I was on leave then, so we haven't done that, I said, can we come back with a comparative source apportionment that we had previously from our earlier modeling? And we will do that. But this is for each individual water body, this is the source apportionment broken down in more detail than we had before. What I would just point out is that the circles there are not proportional to the scale of the amount of phosphorus. It's just giving you an indication for each individual water body. So for example, right up here near the top, Clongurrig works, it's only 190 population equivalent, even though it's 40% of the load, it's only still a very small amount. Whereas down here, Llandrindod, there's with other sewage works there, the population equivalent in there is over 7,500. So it's much bigger. That, if you like, if you were to draw that circle in proportion to the scale of the load, it's much higher load. Similarly here, Bulthwells and Ryadr, those are much bigger. And these are the 3 sites that are on the current AMP program. Okay, just so you know, in the upper Y, as well as our investment program in the lower Y. The other thing, just from our point of view, our input point of view, the gray is showing you CSOs. So we've actually got more definition on where the CSOs are likely to be an issue. I'd point out this one, because I'm sure you'll be able to see that. This is a case where there's 8 CSOs in this area. The load isn't very much, it's not a great deal of phosphorus, but the primary source seems to be coming from CSOs. So we're going to investigate further there, and we'll investigate further where we've got it. So whilst the average is around about 1.5% to 2% as part of the other sources, we're trying to demonstrate a bit more sort of transparency and visibility of where that is likely to be. You can see a large proportion of the loads in these areas is still agriculture, it's livestock and arable from our data, and that septic tanks are only really an issue in a few of the catchments. Moving on fairly rapidly, if you can just ignore the background color, we're going to reproduce these maps without the background colors. Each of these dots represents about 1 kilometre of the river, of the main water flows. Red is its failing, that JNCC target. Blue is its passing. That black and white there. So this is the baseline. This is the level of compliance we have in the upper Y now. You can see there's considerable stretches of the river that are failing. What we've done now then is we ran the model and said, okay, that's the situation when we ran the calibration. What's the actual load? But we said, what happens if we run every works up to its maximum permitted load today? What happens if that arrived today? And you can see there's places where the river deteriorates. So here, as a result of Radar and Newbridge, this stretch of the river would fail. Here in this area here, because of Crossgate sewage works, it would fail. And there's a small stretch here from Llanfarad works. So if we just ran straight up to the current permitted levels, maximum permitted levels, there would be an increased stretch of the river failing. If we go to comparing the baseline with delivering what's in for the upper Y, those 3 sewage works, delivering those water quality improvements as they're currently in our AMP program, you can see it doesn't, you have to work hard to see where it makes a difference. There's a small stretch here of the river, which will then be compliant. And there's a very small stretch there, about 1 kilometre or 2, that becomes compliant. So on its own, and this is the message to the rest of these scenarios, improvements on our sewage works are just not enough. It's still around about 2/3 to 3/4 of the load is really agricultural based. The next one then is, what about the theoretically feasible limits? So that's if every sewage works, and this is just not, it's not possible to do this, but this is what you can do with the model. If you ran your sewage works down to 250 micrograms per litre, the absolute theoretically feasible limit at every works, you can see again, it makes very little difference. There's almost no difference between this and what we're currently. So this is a comparison again with the baseline. It makes very, very little difference other than what we'd already shown in the AMP program where we've got our big loads. There's almost only one little additional place where it makes a difference. And then just moving on, this is the baseline situation. This is what we are now. And this is what happens if we take out all the sewage works. So we just remove all the sewage works. There still are diffuse pollution. There's all the other sources of diffuse pollution, but there's no sewage works in it now. And you can see again, makes very, very little difference. And then finally, just this is looking at if you only had sewage treatment works. Now we'd be taking up most of the load. I'm not saying great, if it was only sewage treatment works, the world would be fine. It's not. This is compared to if you take all the sewage works out again, so one compared to the other. The key message for me is I can't do this on my own. I can't do this for Welsh Water on our own. I can only start to make a real difference with water quality here if I can work with partners, whether they're the likes of Hereford, and we're doing some great work with yourselves, Wynusk, with farming, with developers, etc. It's the only way we're going to actually make a difference with this. And that's it. That's the plan. So currently the timescales are that we've shared this information with NRW. We've had a really good discussion with them. We're going to run some more scenarios, but the next stage is to confirm whether the AMP7 schemes that are currently set out are the right schemes to go with in the upper Y. The lower Y, the program is continuing as planned, but in the upper Y, we're sort of reviewing that. And the aim is that we will get that agreement as soon as possible so we can then progress. And if that means moving some AMP8 money in and moving some AMP7 schemes back because they're not on failing stretches, then that's what the plan will be. That's what we're aiming to do using the modelling. Thank you.
Thanks, folks. That was absolutely fascinating. And we hear you. I'm very conscious of time now. I see that Mary, you have your hand up, but unless this is something really, really urgent, if you could email Fergus with that, would be great, because I do want to make sure we have time for some public Q&A at the end. So thank you. And will you be sharing that?
I can send this off to you. I can send it off to you now. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Fantastic. Okay. So do we have any updates from Herefordshire?
Thank you, Chair. I think I can do that. Conscious of the time, so I'll keep it incredibly brief. I think you've already heard that we've put a planning application in last Friday, I think it was, for wetland at Luston. We're about to sign heads of terms off on a second site, although it's a lot smaller, but it is quite high up the catchment, so that's very good. And there's 4 other sites that are still active that we are progressing with in the first tranche. So there's a lot of activity going on there. I would add that we've appointed recently a delivery director to assist the team in delivering this, and that there's up to 2 technicians we're looking to recruit to also help make it happen, because there's a lot of work involved in putting these through. And thank you, WUF, for working with us on the planning application and doing the works that we require. So that's all happening, and that's probably I'd like to think by the next time we meet that the Luston site will be out there. The only other thing we need to advise on is that we've taken legal counsel again, and the advice is that what we're doing with the wetlands is is our most successful way of tackling the problem we have in North Herefordshire. And I think the final thing really just to add here is that we continue to lobby government, either directly through yourself, Councillor Swinglehurst, or through the leader of the council and through officers, although I'm aware that DEFRA seem to be liaising, I think, more directly with the Environment Agency and with the Rivers Trust, WUF, rather than Herefordshire Council. But so long as we get to hear what's happening secondhand, perhaps, then at least we know what's going on. So I think that's it. I'm obviously very interested to hear what's happening in Powys and the other local authorities. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Could you have somebody from Powys for an update?
Hi, Chair. I think we've got Adrian Humper, Chair. I know Peter Morris was going to attend, but he's on another meeting, I think. So I'm hoping Adrian can come in.
Yes. Thank you, Councillor. Yes, like Mark, to some extent, we are waiting to hear from our barrister with regards legal advice, especially in respect of the scope of applications. We obviously have a number of applications sat there with reserved matters and discharge of conditions, particularly of drainage conditions, where we're seeking additional advice as to how those may enable to move forward. We are still determining applications based upon NRW's latest guidance, so that is continuing. We have had some interesting applications come forward whereby developers are proposing working with adjacent landowners or other properties to actually improve existing septic tank systems and replace them with a more modern system. That's one we're looking at the moment and going through the appropriate assessments. So that's certainly an approach we are looking at, certainly for off-sewer connections that may enable betterment to replace existing older systems with which are much more compliant, up-to-date system. We are involved with other local authorities who have the same issues as us across the whole of Wales, and we are now having regular meetings with amongst ourselves and with NRW. Peter Morris, who hasn't been able to join us today, sits also on the oversight group led by Welsh Government. So that's taking planning, agriculture and the various other components as part of a wider steering group to look at this issue moving forward into the future. So we are doing a lot in the background, which hopefully will support us moving forward into the future. I think that's all I have to say at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Adrian. Thank you. Do you have anyone from Monmouthshire? I think not. Forest of Dean. Councillor Phelps had to leave, didn't he? I don't know if we've got any officers from Forest of Dean. No. Okay. Brecon Beacons.
Oh, hi, Chair. I am here. I have been listening all the way through. Just haven't had my camera on. Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, we've been busy discussing this with our colleagues in Monmouthshire and Powys, Carmarthenshire, and we sit on various groups about the issue, including Planning Officer Society for Wales, because it affects a lot of Welsh authorities, and the Welsh Government are very well aware of some of the issues going on. Just as a matter of fact, and I'm sure Herefordshire have a huge amount more backed up applications than we do, but at last count we've got 60 plus applications that we can't determine, you know, and some of them are at reserved matter stage because of the current advice, and I think there is a lot of you know, frustration out there with this, so we're trying to get some more messaging out there for agents and applicants. What you may be interested to know, just on a wider point than the planning authority, is that we've just approved our draft National Park Management Plan for consultation. It is quite bold and ambitious, so if all our colleagues on the call could have a look at it and feedback, we'd very much appreciate it. It's going to be out for a 16-week public consultation, and it is dealing with some very thorny issues in terms of sustainable land management. It isn't a plan for the authority, it's a plan for the national park. So it's in effect a rallying cry and signpost to other organisations that we want to work with to advocate nature-based solutions, to deal with the issues we face, from environmental sustainability to social resilience. I'm sure James may want to say something about it possibly, but yeah, I commend that to you and I'd be very interested to hear people's views. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Alyssa, I don't need to say any more about the National Park Management Plan draft. I just perhaps prompt Tracy to say whether she wishes to say anything more or not about the status of the LDP2, our local development plan, which is still on hold, and Tracy can add to that. And Tracy, do we want to say anything about the protocol that officers developing on the handling of agricultural planning applications, because that's relevant to this? I'll leave it to you.
Yes, thank you for the prompt, James. I did mean to mention the LDP2. Yes, ourselves and a number of other planning authorities are needing to review our local development plan and had actually started the process, but it is on hold after the preferred strategy stage now, because we do need to rethink our strategy, given that nearly all our settlements are either on the S or the Y. So that's on hold, and we'll have to come up with what we're going to do about that. Yes, James is right about the protocol. We have an internal protocol, an operational protocol that all officers apply to screening of applications within the catchments of the SAC. We are going to be making a user-friendly, more public version of that to put on our website. So when that's ready to go live, I'll let everybody know via the update to this meeting. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Now, Farm Herefordshire, I think Nick Reed's had to go. And if you, Sarah, you've got any updates? She's still on the call? Maybe not.
Sarah's gone.
Oh, okay. All right. Mary, is there any update from the construction industry lobby group?
Not really, because we're stuck in the same position we've been in for 2 years. Shall I go on about that a bit more?
No, you're all right.
No. We continue to poke around basically and bother you all and ask the number of questions we can think of. And most of you are very good at getting back to us, and we're very grateful for that. And we're committed to working with Herefordshire Council on the wetland scheme and become purchasers of the credits as soon as Mark's able, with Liz, to get it through the door. That would be brilliant. There are a few points I'll raise about the action plan, and I might just copy you all in on a few other points about various general things that are affecting how we can work, and that might be to do with the criteria that Natural England are looking at for us, or just general communication problems that we think would be better. You know, you wouldn't have John and Sarah battling against different factions or kind of worrying about misrepresentation of data if we all agreed to the facts and communicated those in a way that Joe Blogs could understand. And that would be, I'll email you all because I'd rather hear the public questions. Yeah.
That would be great. Okay, thanks a lot. So yeah, do we have any questions from members of the public? Helen Hamilton. Hey, Helen.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions. I'd like to make a comment first, if I may, about the Dutch nitrogen judgment that we hear a lot about. And it's really just a reminder that what the Dutch nitrogen judgment was about the grazing of livestock and the spreading of manures and fertilizers. And one of the issues that the judgment had to address was whether or not the measures that the Dutch government was proposing were within the habitats regulations. And those measures included the closure, and I'm quoting from the judgment, the closure of those farms whose activities caused nitrogen deposition. And the judgment was that yes, the habitats regulations did allow for measures as drastic as that. And I'm just pointing that out because of the contrast with the plan that we've got before us. That's just a comment. I've got a couple of very specific questions. The first one is to Natural England, and it's about its mapping and impact risk zones for the SAC. And so for as an example, if I were to look on Magic Map for an application for example, an intensive pig unit, the only risk that would be identified on Magic Maps would be for air quality for ammonia, whereas we know from all of the evidence that we've had put in front of us that actually perhaps the biggest risk from that is how the manure is managed. So why don't the impact risk zones include and show this risk and require consultation with Natural England for the management of manure from intensive livestock units? My second question, shall I ask that as well now?
I think actually, can we do it one at a time? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
So yeah, risk impact zones. Natural England, Claire, you still on the call? Do we have somebody from Natural England on the call still?
You're on mute, Claire.
Yeah, sorry, yes, I'm still here. I can take that question away to get ahead an answer from our national planning team. Obviously, the impact risk zones are not something that are decided on an area team basis. They're evidence-based. We have the evidence around ammonia emissions, which are significant and covered. So I can take that question away as to why they don't cover manure, but it's not, but what I can say, it's not a local area team decision. It's a national planning procedure, but I can provide further details, yeah, offline.
Okay, if you could share the answer with the board or with me, that would be lovely, just so that I know that it's
yeah, of course, yeah,
it's something to carry forward. Thanks, that would be great. Thanks a lot. Yeah, so second question, Helen.
And the second question is for the Environment Agency. So if you look at the Environment Agency's catchment data explorer for the Y, it shows that through the entire catchment, the water courses are showing failures for chemical quality, for chemical levels. Why is that? What's the cause of this failure, and what are the ecological consequences?
Yep.
There's a blanket failure of water bodies now based on a number of chemicals which are almost omnipresent, I believe. So I think that is the one that is knocked, as you know, with Water Framework Directive, it's one out, all out. I think that is the thing that has knocked most of the water bodies that were either passing or were at a better status I think that was the big change in terms of water quality overall headlines, if you like. It's not something that has suddenly happened. They've always been there. It's just a question of were we previously monitoring and recording against it. I mean, if you've got any other specific ones relating to specific water bodies, I can take those outside and find out for you.
Okay, Helen, have you got any specific?
The question was what the ecological consequences
Of the chemical failure?
Mm.
Well, I think
I don't know the answer to that. They're trace elements or trace amounts of very small chemicals. What the environmental impact is, I don't know. I can probably find out. That's if we know.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Dave. Christine Hugh-Jones.
Thank you. I've got two things to say. One, when Herefordshire and Powys were talking about their current situation and planning applications, it was largely about housing and sewage arrangements, and nothing was said about the applications for intensive livestock units, which are coming in, and how those will be regarded and according to what criteria. So that's one thing. Do we do them one at a time?
Yeah, please, if that's okay. Powys, we haven't got anyone from Powys who can talk to our planning thing. Possibly not. Herefordshire?
There was a specific question about
how
planning
agricultural development, because the conversation was principally about residential.
So I mean, so I'm just trying to phrase the question in a way for Herefordshire. Herefordshire, obviously, any planning application that comes in, we will look at it from an HRA appropriate assessment side of it. In relation to, sorry, I'm probably missing the actual question. Sorry.
Well, if we're looking at phosphate neutrality,
yeah,
I wondered how that was going to be judged for intensive livestock applications, of which there are many still on both the Powys and Herefordshire books.
Okay, well, yeah, that would be assessed through an appropriate assessment, where our own ecologist responds, and also we would look to see how Natural England respond. If there's any impact at all whatsoever, then it would be considered on the planning balance. And obviously in the lug catchment, it's very difficult for anything like that to get through. It would be just like with housing, it would have to go through an appropriate assessment.
I guess we'll have to wait to see what happens when one goes through.
Well, you know, there have been a couple of IPUs, intensive poultry rearing units, that potentially have been processed, but they haven't drained into the actual Y catchment. I don't recall any IPUs going through in Herefordshire for a long time, not since the moratorium, if we call it that. They're just they're sitting there, or they'll be withdrawn, I suppose, at some point.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any other questions?
Well, the second thing was really a sort of observation, and how I, as a kind of hydrological layperson, am extremely mystified, because listening to Councillor Ian McIntosh's account from the NRW compliance document, and looking at the slides we've just seen about the source apportionment from Welsh Water, I mean, where is the agricultural diffuse pollution coming from? Where does NRW think it is coming from? And where does the Environment Agency think it is coming from, if we can't, you know, pinpoint it?
I mean, and it's always been my assumption, if they say that they can't draw a straight line between the IPU and the phosphate in the river, it's because the manure is going via a field somewhere, and so therefore it's coming from there, not from the IPU. So it's not a direct correlation. So it might be that you've got an IPU and you take your manure out and you move it, 6 miles down the road to a different bit of the river that doesn't immediately relate. It would be visible, as it were, from the point of view of joining those dots together. I could be wrong, but that's always been my...
Well, I mean, that is exactly my understanding, but
Yeah.
how can we say it's not related to the expansion of intensive livestock farms?
It's not, yes, I mean, you'd have to quite say it's not maybe, directly, indirectly, but yeah, I think it does somewhat confuse the issue. But Dave, come in on that. I can see you've got...
Yeah, a couple of things. Thanks, Christine. The first point, about... well, second point about chicken units. Yeah, it's certainly the case at the moment. I am getting confused here. The planning system, I've just had a quick look in my inbox, my team inbox, and I was away last week on holiday, but I've had a look in the team inbox. Doesn't look anything recently for chicken farms in the particularly Ithon. There's one at Casus, there's one in another part of the Severn. So it may well be that what the Powys guy said about reserve matters, etc., is the state of play with regards to chicken units. I'll ask the question of our Neil Park. I'll ask the question of him whether there is anything in the system that we're aware of, but certainly it is the case that they would need to do an appropriate assessment. With regards to the other question you raised, I think I put something on the chat earlier. When we look at the YSAC overall, the really bad failures are the Cletter, the Cammock, the Dillas, the Clumby, which are in southern Powys, the South Powys part. And when we look at the map layer that we've got for units, there's very few units on those. The bulk of units are very much on the Ithon. I think there's 62 on the Ithon, but that doesn't seem to translate for various reasons. It could be because the flows are better or whatever into those big failures. So chickens are certainly part of the problem. And, we're doing work on inspections. Wyanusk mentioned that they're doing visits to farmers. They're talking with them about settlement and in ditch drainage and in ditch settlement ponds. So there's a lot of work being done on chickens, and they are part of the problem, but it just maybe isn't showing up in the data that we're collecting and have used for the assessment.
So where do we think that the rest of the diffuse agricultural pollution is coming from? Is it coming from pigs? Is it coming from cows? I mean, the thing is, if you're going to have a nutrient management plan, it's sort of wise to know what you're dealing with. And if we don't know what we're dealing with, how are we going to have a plan that works?
Well, there are dairy farms, and we've got a project looking at dairy farms, but these catchments are predominantly beef and sheep, and people have tacked on a small unit. So it's part of all of the nutrient flows coming from sewage treatment plants, coming from private sewage treatment plants. It's coming from poorly performing septic tanks that we don't accept as discharges.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I mean, I'm talking about the apportionment that we saw in the Welsh Water presentation. And the apportionment, showed how much was agriculture and how much was sewage.
Yeah, it does. I think from my point of view, I need to get into the detail of the apportionment. Those slides were very small on my screen, and I didn't quite see the pie charts fully, but the agricultural stuff is chicken farms and various other things. Yeah.
Mindful as I am of the time, and I think David's getting completely put on the spot here with this. But I do think maybe we will return to this at some point, because it would be useful to get a joint understanding of this issue, because it's just confusing everybody to have these different explanations coming forth as to the role of the IPUs in Wales and to the river water quality. So okay, crikey. Look, guys, it's 5:45 now. So unless this is something that you really can't wait for another day, if you pop your hand down, I'd be grateful. Okay. No, we still have a hand. Kinsey Hearn.
Hi, thanks for that. It's only one thing, and apologies for sort of not being able to wait for another day, like Mary, and many others. After 2 years of sort of being held up in the housing, it's got quite desperate. And my question was just for Claire of Natural England. On the one presentation, it says the lug starts at 7 and ends up at 7.2 from Mortimer's Cross down to, forgive me for the other, to the Wordens Bridge. And I just wondered, had any measurements in the, or the 3-year mean been done above Mortimer's Cross Bridge back to Wales?
No, those are the points at which EA do the monitoring, actually, the EA monitor. So it would be actually a question for EA. I'm not aware of that. And then obviously, as soon as you go beyond that, it would be NRW doing the monitoring.
So again, just to follow up, and it's only a comment, that the information is all over the place in terms of, this is not specific to Natural England. We desperately need to have more and more data that is taken from the point that it comes in from Wales, to understand what the impact is across the lug. I'm not, sat here as a poultry farmer. It's, all my fault. So it's quite stressful from a personal perspective, but without the data, we just can't. And I think the lady who was just speaking, Christine, asking about the information, I think there's just got, whether it's funding or whatever it is, it needs to be just hounded to get more data for the meetings to be more constructive going forwards. I just can't see a solution because there's just not enough data to make it. It's all modelling, and people could do more recording and everything else. So apologies, that was all.
No, thanks for that, Kinsey. Yeah, I think data as a subject has come up more than once, hasn't it, today? So I think we are aware that we want to get better data. Councillor McIntosh.
Yes, thank you. It's McIntosh.
McIntosh.
That's right.
McIntosh. I don't know. I was hedging my bets there. I was just changing horses midstream.
No problem. I know everybody wants to get away for their tea, so I'll be very, very brief. Again, on the data front, really, is that in preparation for next meeting, I've read on various different sources from NRW to Welsh Government literature and all sorts that we're already in a period of betterment when it comes to the levels of phosphates in these rivers. They've been going down for quite a long time, and if you read certain papers, as far back as 1971, I believe, in one report. So what I would like to find out really is what rate of betterment are we already in at the moment? Are we in a rate of betterment or not? Because again, there's conflicting views about that. So it would help me really to establish, first of all, are we in a rate of betterment? And if so, how quickly are we getting there? Because for all I know, I could find that it could take us another 2 years to discuss this and then get to the point where actually it's all better. Are we at that? Is it as good as that? I don't know. So it's, I think that's something we could bring to the table next time.
Yeah, I think, well, from my understanding of it is broadly speaking, the phosphate has not significantly altered over the last sort of 7 to 10 years. But anyone who is looking at the ecology of the river, particularly if you're down this end of it, you cannot fail to have noticed the severity of the ecological collapse that is happening. So we have to look at the system holistically, not get too hung up on numbers, and observe the condition of the river, and try and figure out what's happening and how to fix it.
Okay. Yeah, I think that data would be important. And going back to the previous speaker as well.
But it's not.
Yeah, exactly. I think in order for us to be able to properly go to the chicken shed people or whatever for other form of agriculture it is, if we need to be able to say, right, this is the problem, this is how much yours is contributing, so that you can do this.
And we're still learning. We're still learning. We're still understanding, you know, the role of soluble reactive phosphate versus total phosphate, the refocus work, legacy phosphate. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we're still, you know, learning and understanding about, and you know, it's important to recognise that as well. Okay, so
thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McIntosh. Thank you. Right, I'm going to call a halt now.
Not the first, you won't be the last.
No, sure. And the meeting generally, and just put in just an appeal really, Councillor McIntosh, to you, that if there's some way that powers can start sort of lifting their share a little bit of these meetings in terms of hosting and admin, Herefordshire would be grateful, and actually it would be nice. It would be more, you know, we'd feel you know, partnered up in a constructive way. If you could take that back as a consideration, and maybe we can come up to Landlord next time, would be lovely.
I will do, yeah. I mean, I'm meeting with Peter Morris tomorrow morning briefly before another meeting, so I'll mention that to him and
thank you.
See what he has to say.
Because it used to be more sort of, you know, but it's sort of with the pandemic, everything kind of, you know, and that's understandable. But we might try and get back to that. Sort of
point noted.
Share with them if that's possible. That would be great. Okay, lovely. So today's the next meeting. I have no idea. I have to figure that out. And it only remains for me to say thank you all very much for your attendance, and we can stop the recording, please.